The darkness fades into a sea of wind and light. You hear it first, the low hum of the steppe, that endless breath of the earth moving through grass as far as the eye can see. A single rider appears against the dawn, his horse a shadow upon gold. The sound of hooves builds, one, then many, until the plain trembles beneath 1,000 hearts. This is a world before borders, before names carved in stone. A world of motion, of pride and survival, where a people are bound not by walls but by the horizon itself. Beneath the endless sky, they will rise from silence to shape the fate of empires. Their story is not of cruelty, but of courage, of men and women who carried their world on horseback and left behind whispers the wind still remembers. Can you imagine it? The cold air stinging your face, the smell of leather and smoke in your hair, the drumbeat of hooves echoing through your chest. If you rode among them, would you chase glory or simply follow the wind? If you love history, gently tap like and subscribe, so more voices from the past can find their way to you. Now dim your screen, let the air grow still, and listen as the story of the Huns begins. The night spreads wide across the grasslands, a slow tide of shadow brushing the endless plains. Somewhere far off, a single horse whinnies, soft, questioning, as though speaking to the moon. The steppe wind moves next, whispering through the brittle reeds that fringe the frozen rivers. If you listen carefully, you might think you hear voices in that wind, murmurs of clans long vanished, the faint song of those who rode before history began to take notes. Before the world had names for borders or kings, there were the riders of the horizon. Their home was a moving circle of sky and earth, bound only by the path of the sun. To the settled farmers beyond the forests and mountains, they were phantoms, mysterious, swift, and fierce. But within the heart of the steppe, they were simply people, tending their herds, mending harnesses, sharing quiet laughter around the fire. It is here, on these lonely plains, that the story of the Huns begins. No one can say exactly where they came from. Some whispered that they were born beyond the far mountains of the east, where storms brewed over lands few had seen. Others believed they were descended from spirits of wind and thunder, children of the sky who had traded wings for horses. Later scholars would argue and write, searching for clues in languages and bones, but the Huns themselves left no written words. Their tale survives instead in the memories of those who feared or admired them. The Romans, the Goths, the travellers who saw their tents shimmering like dark sails across the grass. Picture the steppe at dawn. The air is sharp, smelling faintly of frost and smoke. Low mists cling to the riverbanks where the herds drink, their breaths forming clouds that drift and vanish. A woman kneels beside a fire, shaping a piece of leather with careful hands. Behind her, a child practices with a small bow, arrows whistling harmlessly into a mound of earth. And beyond them, silhouettes of riders move across the horizon, their fur-lined cloaks billowing, their ponies nimble and strong. For the Huns, the horse was not merely a companion, it was an extension of the self. A child learned to ride almost as soon as they could walk. They ate, traded, and even slept upon horseback. The world unfolded for them in motion, and the steppe's vastness demanded it. To stop too long was to invite hunger, for the grass that fed their herds was always moving with the seasons. So they followed it, north in the summer, south in the biting cold. In the evenings when the camp was pitched, the air filled with the music of strings and the deep hum of drums made from hide. Fires flickered against the sides of round felt tents. They told stories then of great hunts, of ancestors who chased the stars, of spirits who guarded the rivers and the herds. Laughter came easily, echoing across the still night until it blended with the sound of the wind. Yet beyond that horizon, change was stirring. To the west lay the lands of the Alans, the Goths, and beyond them the Roman world, heavy with marble and memory. These settled peoples watched the steppe uneasily. Traders brought news of swift raiders who struck like lightning, vanishing into the plains before pursuit could begin. No one yet called them Huns, but already their legend was forming. It is easy now to imagine them as a single horde, faceless and fierce. But in truth, they were many small clans, each ruled by its own elders, bound together by kinship and need. There was no empire yet, no Attila to shape them into one, only families, herds, and the promise of survival carved from a harsh land. The Huns' world was not empty. It thrummed with life. Wolves stalking the edges of the camps, eagles wheeling above the ridges, the grass itself whispering like a sea. They knew every bend of the river, every patch of healing herb, every migration of game. Their wisdom was born of motion, their strength of simplicity. Somewhere in the darkness, a storyteller might have looked into the fire and spoken softly. Once we were wind. Now we are riders. The earth carries us and the sky watches us. So long as the grass grows, we will not be lost. For generations, this was enough. But destiny has a way of calling softly at first. Across the centuries, travellers' accounts would describe the Huns as small, strong, and hard as the land itself. Their faces were weathered by the wind, their eyes narrow from years of watching horizons. Their skill with the bow was unmatched. They could strike a target while galloping full speed, arrows loosed from a short, recurved weapon that could pierce armour. To the Romans, this seemed almost supernatural, as if the horse and rider shared one spirit. But these warriors were not always at war. They traded furs for grain, accepted strangers into their ranks, and married among neighbouring peoples. Life on the steppe required openness. Isolation meant death. So their bloodlines mingled with those of Scythians, Sarmatians, and others whose names would fade into dust. The Huns were less a single tribe than a living current of humanity, fluid, shifting, unstoppable. In the hush of night, after the herds were tethered, a mother might hum to her child. The melody would rise and fall like the sway of a horse's gait. There were no written notes, no parchment to preserve the tune, yet such songs endured for centuries, carried from one generation to the next by memory alone. Perhaps somewhere, deep within the music of the Central Asian plains today, echoes of those lullabies remain. As seasons turned, the steppe itself began to change. Winters grew crueler, the pastures less forgiving. Herds had to travel farther, and with them went the people. The Huns' movement westward was not an invasion at first, but a migration, a slow search for gentler grass and safer ground. Yet each step brought them closer to lands already claimed, to tribes unready to share. The first clashes were small, the kind of skirmishes that come and go like storms. But with every victory, the Huns learned new tactics, absorbed new weapons, and drew new followers. The world beyond the steppe began to notice. Roman envoys in distant provinces heard rumors. Strange riders with faces tattooed by the sun, whose arrows flew farther than any others. The stories spread faster than the riders themselves. Fear travels easily on the wind. And still, for those within the campfire's circle, life remained simple. Tending, mending, surviving. There were no maps, no grand strategies, only the rhythm of necessity. Imagine the cold starlight falling across their tents. The fire crackles low, horses stamp and snort in the dark. Somewhere, a child wakes and listens to the wind. It carries the same sounds their ancestors heard. The cry of an owl, the distant rush of hooves. To that child, the future is invisible, yet waiting. The grasslands stretch endlessly toward the west. Beyond them lies a world of cities, of gold and stone, of walls and roads. The Huns do not yet know these things, but the road between them and that world has already begun to open. For now the riders rest beneath the stars. Their lives are small circles of light moving through a sea of darkness. Yet even small fires, when gathered together, can illuminate a continent. The wind sighs through the camp, stirring the embers. Somewhere a horse nickers softly, as though dreaming. The storyteller falls silent. Only the steppe speaks now, vast and patient. Soon the riders will move again. Morning breaks softly over the steppe. A pale gold light spills across the horizon, brushing the tall grass until it shimmers like water. The air is cool, still scented with smoke from the night's dying fires. Within the camp, the first sounds of life stir. A baby's quiet cry, the creak of leather straps, the rhythmic snort of horses waiting to run. To wake upon the open plain is to be surrounded by motion, even in silence. The earth seems to breathe beneath you. The Huns rose each day not to conquer, but to move. Life itself was a kind of journey, measured by hoofbeats, by the changing sky, by the faint trails left behind that the wind would soon erase. For them, home was not a fixed place. It was wherever the herd could graze and the fire could burn. Theirs was a world without walls, where the horizon promised both sustenance and uncertainty. Imagine a typical morning in their camp. Smoke rises from low clay hearths inside felt tense. The smell of fermented mare's milk, kumis, drifts through the air, sharp and faintly sweet. Children chase each other barefoot across the frost-hardened earth, their laughter bright against the hush of dawn. Women untie the horses, checking each animal for injuries from the long night. Men tighten the bindings on saddles, their hands moving by habit, every motion practiced since childhood. To an outsider, it might seem a hard life. Yet for the Huns, this rhythm was comfort. The steppe offered all they needed: grass for their herds, rivers for water, wood for fire, and a sky that stretched wide enough to hold their dreams. They did not crave cities or stone. To live beneath open heavens was to feel the world as it truly was: vast, unpredictable, alive. The horse remained at the center of all things. Each animal had its own name, its own story. A Hun warrior might speak softly to his horse before battle, promising safe return. He would never strike it in anger, for to do so was to wound himself. Horses carried their riders through storms and across frozen rivers, and their bond was sacred. Many believed that when a man died, his horse's spirit would help guide him across the fields of the afterlife, galloping beside him through the endless sky. Every saddle bore marks of its owner's life, tassels woven by a loved one, bits of carved bone or metal charms shaped like the crescent moon. The stirrups were simple, yet each had been rubbed smooth by years of travel. To mount one's horse at sunrise was a daily ritual. The tightening of straps, the adjustment of the bow case, the faint jingle of iron rings. Then, with a small whistle, the herd would surge forward, a moving river of strength and sound. They rode not in rigid formations but in flowing lines, each rider reading the movement of the others the way birds do in flight. Communication was by glance, by gesture, by instinct. On the steppe, there were no generals shouting orders, only leaders whose courage drew others near. This unspoken understanding made them swift beyond imagining. 100 riders could vanish into the horizon, scattering like dust, only to reappear miles away as a single force again. Their bows were masterpieces of invention, short, curved weapons made from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, perfected over generations. A Hun could draw, aim, and release in the space of a heartbeat, his body rising and falling with his horse's stride. The bow's snap was like thunder in miniature, the arrow's flight nearly invisible until it found its mark. This skill, born from necessity on the hunt, would one day terrify empires, but for now it was simply part of survival, a way to bring down deer or defend the herd from wolves. When the sun climbed higher, families packed their tents. The round homes, gers or yurts, were marvels of mobility. A wooden lattice frame, covered with thick felt made from wool, could be collapsed and reassembled within hours. The women led this work, singing softly as they rolled up layers of felt, the melody matching the sway of their movements. The men drove the carts, large, slow-moving platforms drawn by oxen that carried the youngest children and the household goods. Each wagon creaked like an old friend. The rhythm of its wheels became the heartbeat of the tribe. Travel was not random. Every clan followed a known circuit, passed down through generations, summer pastures near the rivers, winter shelters in the wooded valleys. They marked their paths not with signs, but with memory. A particular rock, a bent tree, the curve of a hill, these were their maps. And though the steppe seemed endless, each family knew exactly where the land offered kindness and where it turned cruel. By midday, the camp had vanished, leaving only faint depressions in the grass. The Huns moved like shadows, their passage erasing itself behind them. Birds wheeled overhead, following the herds for insects stirred by hooves. The sound of the journey was a song of bells and wind, the chime of harness ornaments, the hiss of grass against leather, the murmur of voices carried by the breeze. In the evenings, after miles of riding, they would stop beside a stream or grove. Fires were lit again, and life folded back into its smaller circle. Food was simple. Meat roasted on spits, curdled milk, flat bread cooked on heated stones. They ate together, sharing what each had. Hospitality was sacred. A stranger who approached the fire was welcomed first, questioned later. To refuse warmth or food to a traveller was to defy the very laws of the steppe. When the meal ended, stories began. The oldest men recounted battles fought long ago, or hunts that had tested their courage. Women spoke of omens seen in dreams, a white bird flying against the wind, a child born beneath an eclipse. And sometimes, when the night was calm, a musician would take up the morin chur, a horse-headed fiddle whose low, haunting notes seemed to echo the landscape itself. The melody drifted far into the dark, mingling with the crackle of the fire and the endless whisper of grass. Life was not without danger. Storms could rise without warning, sweeping the plains with lightning and hail. In such moments, the Huns would drive their herds into hollows and crouch beside them, cloaks pulled tight, waiting for the thunder to pass. Wolves and bandits also prowled the margins of their routes. Yet these threats were part of the pattern of existence, as natural as the seasons themselves. Survival depended not on avoiding hardship, but on meeting it with grace. Children learned early to read the sky. They could tell by the tilt of clouds whether rain would come, by the call of cranes when it was time to move south. Girls were taught to sew harnesses as strong as armor. Boys learned to track animals and mend bows. Everyone contributed, for in a world without walls, each life sustained the others. Among the Huns, leadership was not inherited through strict bloodlines, but earned through respect. The title of chieftain was given to the one whose wisdom or bravery guided the people best. Council fires would be held under the stars, where elders debated long into the night while the younger men listened in silence. Decisions came slowly, shaped by consensus rather than command. Such unity gave them resilience. When famine struck or enemies threatened, they could gather swiftly and move as one body. Trade connected them to distant worlds. Caravans from the Silk Road occasionally crossed their paths, bringing silk, metalwork, and spices. The Huns offered furs, horses, and amber in return. Through such exchanges, stories of far lands reached their ears, of cities with towers that touched the sky, of seas where the water tasted of salt, of emperors who wore robes heavy with gold thread. These tales stirred curiosity, but not envy. The Huns valued freedom above luxury. A man who could ride where he pleased was wealthier, they believed, than any who slept behind stone walls. Still, curiosity planted quiet seeds. Some young riders wondered what lay beyond the next horizon, beyond even the borders of the known grasslands. They watched the setting sun and felt a tug, a faint restlessness that mirrored the movement of their ancestors. Destiny often begins as a whisper, and the steppe, with all its winds, carried many. As the season deepened, the plains turned golden. Grasses swayed like waves under the afternoon sun. The herds grazed contentedly, fattening before the long winter. Nights grew colder, stars sharper. Within the tents, fires burned brighter. Families huddled close, mending clothes and sharing stories. A sense of peace lingered, the calm before the unknown years that waited ahead. Some nights, elders spoke of ancient migrations, of how their people had once followed the reindeer north or the rivers south, always seeking better lands. The younger listeners would glance toward the darkness beyond the camp and feel that same instinct stirring within. The world, vast and open, seemed to call them forward. And so, unknowingly, they were preparing, not for conquest, but for survival that would soon take a larger shape. Forces far to the east were in motion, other nomadic tribes pressing westward, displacing one people after another like ripples in water. The Huns were part of this living tide, though they could not yet see the shores it would reach. For now, the steppe remained their universe. The sky arched above them, boundless and serene. When they lay down to sleep, the constellations were their roof, the murmuring grass their lullaby. Horses shifted nearby, their breath forming small clouds in the moonlight. Somewhere, a flute played softly, a melody as fragile as starlight, fading as dreams began to rise. They did not yet know that their children's children would ride far beyond these plains, that their name would echo in every corner of the known world. Tonight, there was only peace, the quiet bond between human, horse, and horizon. The fire burns low. The riders dream of open fields without end. The wind, patient as time itself, carries their breath upward, toward the endless sky that has always been their home. The wind has changed. Across the steppe, where once it carried only the sigh of grass and the rustle of hooves, new sounds travel now. Distant thunder that is not from the sky. The rhythm of migration, once steady and familiar, begins to feel uncertain. To the east, other tribes are moving, pushed by hunger, by weather, by the slow and unseen tremors of shifting power. The great balance of the plains is beginning to tilt. At first, the Huns barely notice. Seasons have always brought change. Dry years and wet years. Herds that thrived and herds that wandered too far. But this time, something different rides on the wind. Rumors of war, of strange riders with unfamiliar banners. The steppe has always been vast enough for all who roam it, yet suddenly it seems smaller, crowded with restless movement. The elders sense it before the young do. In their councils, held beneath starlight, they speak of travelers from the east who carry stories like omens. Whole nations, they say, are being displaced. Tribes upon tribes flowing westward like a river that can no longer find its banks. The Xiongnu, once mighty, have broken apart. New confederations rise in their place, and behind them, unseen yet felt, is a pressure like the weight of a coming storm. The Huns listen. They have weathered storms before, but they know too that when the plains grow crowded, peace becomes fragile. Grazing lands are life. When they vanish, even old friends can become enemies. As the migrations begin to ripple outward, the Huns move as they always have. Cautiously, swiftly, together. They shift their herds toward new pastures, testing the borders of other people's lands. Sometimes they are welcomed. Sometimes arrows answer their arrival. For every patch of grass they claim, another must be surrendered. Step by step their path bends westward. To the north and south, the great rivers, the Don, the Volga, the Dniester, form glittering boundaries between worlds. Across those waters lie the lands of the Alans and the Goths, proud and powerful tribes whose roots run deep into the soil of Europe. The Huns know little of these people yet, but they have heard their names carried on the breath of traders. Tall, fair-haired, skilled in war, the Goths are said to build wooden halls and worship gods of thunder. The Alans, fierce horsemen like themselves, roam the foothills of the Caucasus, guarding the mountain passes. The Huns reach those borderlands in silence. Scouts move ahead, studying the terrain. They see settlements, fields fenced with timber, smoke curling from thatched roofs, flocks grazing in the meadows. To a people who have never known stillness, such rootedness seems both wondrous and strange. Yet it is also a kind of vulnerability. Walls can be burned, fields can be trampled. The Huns begin to understand the power of movement, the way it can overwhelm what stands still. The first contact is cautious. A small band of Huns, hungry from long travel, approaches an Alan village to trade. They offer furs and horses in exchange for grain. The Alans, wary but curious, agree. For a while, exchange replaces fear. Yet beneath the surface, suspicion lingers. The steppe people seem endless in number, their arrival unpredictable. When one group moves on, another appears behind it. To the Alans, it begins to feel less like trade and more like encroachment. And so, as often happens in history, a spark becomes a flame. A dispute over cattle, who owns which herd, who crossed which river, turns violent. Swords flash in the sunlight. The skirmish lasts minutes, but its echo travels far. Retaliation follows, swift and merciless. The Huns, masters of mounted warfare, strike before dawn, their arrows falling like rain. By noon, the village is gone, its people scattered. News spreads quickly. The Alans gather allies. The Goths watch from afar. The Huns do not seek conquest yet. Their raids are for survival, for supplies, but each victory strengthens their unity. Leaders emerge, men whose names will one day fade into legend, but whose influence begins here, among the smoke and the wind. They learn to fight not as scattered clans, but as one moving storm. To the Romans, who will later hear of these events, the Huns seem to appear out of nowhere, a people from beyond the world, as one historian would write. But nothing in history truly comes from nowhere. The Huns' arrival in Europe is the result of centuries of movement, of small choices and great needs. They are not monsters or myths, but human beings seeking space in a shrinking land. Yet to those who witness their coming, they seem unstoppable. In the Gothic lands, villages begin to empty. Families flee toward the forests or the safety of Roman borders. The Huns move like wind through tall grass, silent, swift, leaving little behind but uncertainty. They are not yet an empire, but already they have become a force that reshapes the map. Imagine a band of riders approaching at dusk. The sun bleeds red across the plains. The riders' silhouettes are dark, their fur cloaks heavy with dust. Bows hang at their sides, and each carries a small quiver of arrows bound in leather. Their horses snort clouds into the cooling air. As they near the edge of a Gothic settlement, dogs begin to bark. Then silence, the heavy stillness before a storm breaks. The attack, when it comes, is sudden. Arrows whistle through the dusk, torches blaze, and panic spreads faster than sound. To the Huns, such raids are not cruelty, but necessity, a way to secure food, weapons, or hostages. They do not linger to occupy or rebuild. By dawn, they are gone, leaving only hoofprints and the faint smell of smoke. For the Romans, news of these raids arrives as rumour. Merchants and refugees speak of invaders who appear from the mists, whose horses can outrun any pursuit, whose arrows pierce armour. The empire's chroniclers listen with disbelief. They have faced many enemies, Goths, Persians, Vandals, but none like this. These newcomers seem to come from the very edge of the earth, from lands where maps end and imagination begins. Meanwhile, within the Hunnic camps, life remains strangely ordinary. After each raid, they return to their tents, to the warmth of fires, to laughter and stories. Children play beside piles of captured goods. Women sort fabrics and metal, reshaping them for use. The rhythm of life continues, undisturbed by the chaos left behind. To them, war is not a separate act, but a continuation of living, another kind of hunt. Winter comes early that year. The rivers freeze, turning silver under the moon. The herds huddle close, and the riders wrap themselves in heavy furs. Around the fires, they tell stories of what lies ahead. Some say the west is filled with mountains of stone and cities of light. Others imagine rivers of gold. A few, older and wiser, remind the young that such things are dreams, and dreams can be dangerous. Yet even as the snow falls, the westward pull grows stronger. In distant Constantinople, the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire, word of the Huns finally reaches the imperial court. Emperors and generals debate their meaning. Are they a mere nuisance, another group of raiders to be bought off with gold? Or are they something greater, a storm that could sweep across the whole of Europe? The truth is not yet clear. The Huns themselves do not yet know what they will become. But on the steppe, a new confidence begins to stir. Victory brings unity. The small clans that once lived separately begin to gather under common leaders. Bonds are forged through marriage, through shared triumph, through survival. Where once there were dozens of names, now there is one that others begin to fear: the Huns. Their legend spreads faster than their riders can travel. Some say they are demons sent from the east to punish mankind. Others claim they descend from the sons of Cain. In truth, they are none of these, merely people who have learned to ride the edge of necessity. Yet myth has a way of shaping reality. The more the world fears them, the stronger they become. As spring returns, the snow melts into rivers that gleam like mirrors. The plains turn green again, and with the grass, new ambitions grow. The Huns now control the steppes north of the Black Sea, a vast domain stretching farther than any one rider can cross in a day. They trade, they raid, they rule. The tribes who once opposed them, the Alans, the Ostrogoths, now serve them or flee before them. In a single generation, the balance of the world has changed. At night, as the fires burn low, an elder might still whisper of the old days, when the Huns were only families on the move, when their greatest battle was against the cold wind. But those memories are fading. The young no longer see themselves as wanderers. They are conquerors now, riders of destiny. Somewhere, a chieftain stands on a rise and looks west. The sun is setting, and the light paints his armor red. Beyond that horizon lies Rome, ancient, powerful, glittering like a mirage. He does not yet know its name, but something in his heart stirs at the sight. For the first time, the steppe feels small. The wind picks up again, carrying the scent of rain and distant fires. Across the grasslands, the riders begin to move. The storm that has been gathering for years is finally on its way. The plains have changed. Where once there were scattered camps and drifting herds, now fires stretch in long lines across the horizon. Their glow flickering like constellations fallen to earth. The clans of the Huns, once independent and uncounted, have gathered together. The wind that carried them westward has settled for a moment, forming not a storm, but a shape, something that resembles an empire, though no one yet dares call it that aloud. In the silence after conquest, a strange calm settles over the steppe. The defeated Alans and Goths have either joined the Huns or fled into Roman lands. The newcomers bring with them new crafts, new songs, new ways of speaking. The Hunnic camps, once woven only from felt and hide, now hold treasures from many worlds. Iron cauldrons traded from Gothic smiths, Roman glass gleaming like frozen water, silk brought from far eastern caravans. The steppe, once a sea of sameness, begins to shimmer with variety. Around the central fires, new words are spoken, words of unity and of power. For generations, the Huns had lived by motion, their lives shaped by the rhythm of survival. Now, for the first time, they pause long enough to look beyond the next sunrise. The elders speak of alliances, of tribute, of rule. The younger warriors, restless and proud, listen and dream of greater things. Among them are men whose names will one day echo in the chronicles of other nations. Rugila, Oktar, Mundzuk, leaders whose courage and cunning knit the Huns together into something formidable. Each commands his own following, yet they meet often to plan raids and resolve disputes. Between them grows a fragile balance, a shared understanding that only through cooperation can their people thrive. Their power is not bound by walls or cities. It travels with them, in the speed of their horses, in the precision of their arrows, in the loyalty of their followers. They do not need fortresses. Their strength is movement itself. Yet they are learning the art of influence, of how to make others bend without breaking them. Beyond their lands, the Roman world trembles. The empire, once a single, unshakable pillar, now stands divided, east and west, two crowns bound by fragile threads. The western half, governed from Ravenna, grows weaker each year, its armies scattered, its coffers drained. The eastern half, ruled from the glittering city of Constantinople, still holds its wealth and pride, but even its strength depends increasingly on diplomacy, on paying enemies to keep the peace. Into this uneasy world step the Huns. Their riders, swift and unpredictable, begin to appear not just as invaders, but as allies, as mercenaries, as negotiators of fear. Roman envoys, draped in purple and gold, travel north to meet them, bearing gifts, coins, wine, silks, and requests for aid. They speak through interpreters, their voices trembling slightly as they try to read the faces of men whose eyes reflect both kindness and danger. The first agreements are simple: gold in exchange for peace. The Huns accept the tribute, though to them it is less about wealth than about recognition. When a mighty empire pays you to stay your hand, it means you have already conquered something unseen. Their certainty, their pride. In the evenings, the campfires burn brighter with Roman coins thrown into the flames for luck. The elders speak of destiny fulfilled, of power long promised by the spirits of the steppe. The young men drink fermented milk and boast of cities they have never seen, where marble gleams like moonlight and fountains never freeze. But the Huns are not content with gold alone. They begin to move again, not as scattered raiders, but as a unified tide. Their horses thunder across the plains toward the Danube, that wide river which marks the edge of Rome's reach. On the far bank lie fortresses, markets, and roads that stretch all the way to the heart of Europe. To cross that river is to step into legend. Spring rains swell the waters. The river's surface gleams like steel beneath a grey sky. For days, the Huns ride along its banks, searching for the shallows, testing the current. Then one morning, at dawn, they cross. Hooves splash, carts creak, and the riders emerge on the southern side, dripping but unbroken. Behind them, the horizon fades into mist. Ahead lies a new world. The Romans stationed along the frontier watch in awe and disbelief. They had heard of these horsemen, seen their effects in rumours and ruins, but few had ever looked upon them directly. To the soldiers in the watchtowers, the sight is both terrifying and mesmerising. Thousands of riders moving as one, their banners fluttering, their armour glinting like waves of dark light. The Romans send messengers racing toward the nearest city. By the time the alarm spreads, the Huns are already gone, vanished into the countryside like smoke. Yet not every meeting ends in blood. In some towns, the gates open willingly. Local rulers, desperate to save their people, send out gifts and hostages. The Huns accept, nodding solemnly, and move on. Their raids are swift, their discipline remarkable. They do not destroy for the sake of destruction. Each act has purpose, to test the empire's strength, to learn its paths, to gather what will be needed later. In Constantinople, the emperor's advisors argue late into the night. Some urge war, others caution peace. One thing is clear: the Huns can no longer be ignored. They are not a passing threat, but a new element in the balance of the world. Ambassadors are sent again, bearing larger tributes. A treaty is written, parchment words meant to hold back the tide. For a time, it works. The Huns retreat, richer and more confident than before. Among their leaders, Rugila stands tallest. He is no emperor, yet the others defer to him. His tent becomes a court of sorts, a place where foreign envoys are received, where disputes are judged. He wears no crown, but his authority shines in quieter ways. The calm of his voice, the precision of his commands, the respect with which warriors lower their heads as he passes. He dreams not of Rome's marble, but of unity, of a people bound together not by fear, but by purpose. Under Rugila's guidance, the Huns build alliances with tribes once considered enemies. The Ostrogoths, fierce and proud, now fight beside them. The Alans ride as their scouts. The Gepids guard their herds. The steppe becomes a web of loyalties, held together by strength and generosity. When conflict arises, Rugila settles it with gifts, with marriage pacts, with the promise of shared victory. Through these bonds, the Huns begin to learn the ways of empire, not the Roman kind with stone and senate, but one born of movement and trust. They understand that true power lies not only in conquering others, but in keeping them close. On quiet nights, Rugila sits beside the fire, gazing at the stars. The constellations are the same ones his ancestors followed east of the Volga, yet they seem different now, nearer, perhaps, or more familiar. He thinks of the Romans with their scrolls and palaces, their endless words for order and law. He does not envy them. Their strength is brittle, he senses, held together by pride and habit. The Huns, by contrast, are alive, fluid, growing like a river that cannot be dammed. But even rivers, he knows, need direction. When Rugila dies suddenly, some say from illness, others from a wound left untended, the unity he built trembles. The clans mourn, then look toward his kin for guidance. Among them stands his nephew, a young warrior named Attila. Quiet, watchful, with eyes that miss nothing. He listens more than he speaks, studying the mistakes of elders and the arrogance of foreigners. Those who meet him remember his calm, his precision, and the way silence gathers around him like a cloak. Few realize that the course of nations is already beginning to turn toward him. For now, the steppe holds its breath. The Huns are strong, feared, respected. Rome, though uneasy, pays its tributes and hopes the peace will last. But under the surface, change moves again, slow, invisible, inevitable. The winds that once carried families westward now begin to circle, forming the pattern of something greater, an empire born not of stone, but of speed. On the far edges of their lands, sentinels watch the horizon. Distant fires flicker, traders, refugees, or perhaps enemies. The night smells of rain and iron. Somewhere, a rider mounts his horse and whispers a prayer to the sky. The stars seem to answer, cold and steady. The world is shifting once more. The echo of Rome's power still rolls across the land, but another rhythm is rising to meet it. The steady drumbeat of hooves, the living pulse of the plains. Soon those two sounds will collide, and when they do, history will remember not only the empire that fell, but the riders who moved through its ruins like wind through grass. The seasons turn again, and the grass rises high upon the plains. But now the wind carries a sharper sound, the ring of steel, the distant cry of training. Across the land once ruled by Rugila, young warriors are gathering. The herds still graze, the tents still sway in the breeze. Yet something in the air has changed. The Huns, once scattered by lineage and habit, are becoming one people in truth, shaped, as all great things are, by fire. At the center of this quiet transformation stands Attila. He is not yet the fearsome name that history will whisper, not yet the scourge who will make empires tremble. He is simply a man in his prime, calm, observant, neither cruel nor rash. His voice is soft, but his gaze holds weight. When he speaks, others fall silent. They sense that beneath his stillness lies something unyielding. Attila has inherited more than Rugila's domain. He has inherited his uncle's vision. That unity is strength, and that scattered tribes can become a single nation if bound by purpose. Yet Attila's dreams go further. He looks beyond the steppe, beyond the rivers, beyond the gold and treaties of the Romans. He imagines a power that moves not only through conquest, but through will. A people so disciplined, so swift, that no border could contain them. He begins to build that vision not through grand proclamations, but through simple acts. He visits the camps himself, riding alone, speaking with chieftains, listening to grievances. He rewards loyalty quietly and punishes deceit without spectacle. To those who serve him well, he gives not gold but trust, the highest currency among the Huns. And soon, that trust becomes the mortar of a new order. The Huns under Attila do not build palaces, yet their discipline becomes as enduring as stone. Training camps rise where once there were only pastures. Young riders practice for hours, loosing arrows at full gallop until their hands bleed. The bow becomes an extension of breath, the horse an echo of thought. Veterans teach the younger men how to move in silence, how to vanish into shadow, how to survive on nothing but dew and resolve. In the evenings, when the sun dips low and paints the sky with fire, they gather to feast. Meat roasts on spits and laughter fills the air. But beneath the revelry runs a current of focus. Each song, each toast, is a reminder of what they have become. Not merely tribes surviving upon the steppe, but warriors chosen by fate. Attila's brother Bleda shares power beside him. For a time, their rule is balanced, each complementing the other. Bleda known for his open generosity, Attila for his restraint. Together they maintain peace with the Romans, accepting tribute in exchange for quiet borders. Gold flows into their camps like rivers in spring, and for a while, prosperity spreads. The people are content. The fires burn high. But gold is a restless gift. It can buy horses, weapons, and wine, yet it can also buy pride. Some chiefs grow complacent, measuring their worth by the weight of coins rather than courage. Others question why they should bow to Roman wealth at all. The empire's tribute, meant to pacify, becomes a slow poison. Attila feels it. He watches as softness creeps in, as unity wavers beneath comfort's shadow. One night, he rides alone into the hills. The sky above him is alive with stars, endless, cold, familiar. He thinks of his ancestors who crossed mountains and rivers without fear, who carried their world in saddlebags and memory. He senses their presence in the wind, urging him onward. Do not trade freedom for gold, the silence seems to say. Remember who you are. When Attila returns to camp, his resolve has hardened. He calls the chiefs together, men of every tribe, every tongue, and speaks not as a ruler demanding obedience, but as one voice among them. His words are simple. Gold fades, walls fall, only strength endures. We are not here to serve the Romans, nor to depend upon their fear. We are the riders of the world. The sky is our roof, the earth our throne. If they offer tribute, let it be for peace on our terms. If they break that peace, let them learn again what the wind sounds like when it carries our hooves. The council listens in silence. Some nod, others frown, but none can look away. There is no fire in his tone, only calm conviction, heavier than thunder. When he finishes, no one speaks for a long while. Then, one by one, they rise and bow their heads. The Huns are united once more. Peace with Rome falters soon after. A border garrison refuses tribute. Merchants are slain. And like a spark in dry grass, the conflict spreads. Attila moves swiftly, not in anger, but in precision. He leads his armies south toward the Danube once again. This time the crossing is not cautious. Thousands of riders thunder across the river, their armor gleaming beneath the morning sun. Roman watchtowers fall silent before them. The empire's defenses crumble like sand. Yet Attila's genius lies not in destruction, but in control. He strikes where he must and spares where it serves him. Towns that surrender are left untouched. Those that resist vanish. He sends envoys ahead of his armies, offering peace to those who will pay, mercy to those who will yield. Fear does his work before the first arrow flies. Within months, the Danubian provinces bend beneath his will. Tribute increases, treaties are rewritten. Roman officials, once arrogant, now speak with trembling courtesy. And still, Attila demands not humiliation, but balance. Let them live, he says to his generals, but let them remember. In the heart of his growing domain, Attila builds a capital, not of marble, but of wood and felt, near the great river Tisza. Here the tribes gather from every corner of the steppe, their camps spreading like waves around his hall. Envoys come from distant lands, Roman ambassadors in embroidered robes, Gothic princes bearing gifts, traders with camels laden with silken spices. They enter expecting savagery. They find order. Attila's court is simple, yet imposing. The floor is covered in fine carpets. The air smells of roasted meat and pine smoke. His throne is of carved wood, plain but tall. He wears no jewels, no gold, only a sword at his side, said to be the blade of Mars, the war god's own gift to his people. When he speaks, his words are measured, his logic unassailable. Even his enemies leave impressed, if uneasy. One Roman envoy, Priscus, later writes of dining with Attila. He describes how the Hun leader ate from a wooden plate while his guests used dishes of silver, how he drank from a simple cup while others sipped from goblets of gold. It was a lesson unspoken. Power does not glitter. True command needs no ornament. But beneath this surface of calm, tension brews. Bleda, once his brother in rule, grows distant. Rumours spread of jealousy, of conflicting visions for their people. The partnership that once steadied the Huns begins to fracture. Some whisper that the empire is not large enough for two kings. Others say Attila's patience has run thin. One winter, Bleda dies. How, no one can say. Some claim illness, others assassination. The truth drifts away like smoke. What remains certain is that Attila emerges as the sole ruler of his people. There is mourning, but also acceptance. Among the Huns, destiny carries a weight heavier than sentiment. They believe that only one rider can lead the herd. With Bleda gone, Attila's power becomes absolute, yet he wears it lightly. He does not crown himself emperor. He calls himself only the leader of my people. His word, however, carries farther than any crown could. Under his command, the Huns become not just warriors, but a nation in motion. The world beyond their borders begins to tremble. To the north, tribes seek his protection. To the south, Rome watches in uneasy silence. In Constantinople, the emperor's advisors debate how much gold will buy peace this time. And in the markets of Europe, merchants whisper his name with awe and fear. They call him Attila the Hun, the hawk of the steppes, the unifier, the hand of fate. In the stillness of night, Attila himself does not think of titles. He walks among his horses, running a hand along their flanks, listening to their steady breathing. The stars above him are the same ones that guided his ancestors. He thinks of Rugila, of the countless riders who came before. The fire of the steppe burns in his chest, yet beneath it lies something quieter, a longing not just to conquer, but to prove that a people once thought scattered and small could become the measure of the world. The Huns sleep, their fires glowing faintly against the vast plain. Beyond them, the dark silhouettes of their horses shift like waves. Far away, the Roman Empire, ancient, proud, and weary, dreams uneasy dreams. Its walls stand firm for now, but even stone can hear the distant thunder of hooves. The storm that began as a whisper among the grasses has found its shape at last, and its heart beats in the chest of a single man. Dawn spreads quietly across the camp beside the river Tisa. Mist clings to the reeds, and the smell of wet earth drifts through the air. From every direction comes the low murmur of life. Horses snorting, women stoking coals, the faint ringing of metal where armor is being mended. Among these sounds moves a single figure, tall and still, his cloak drawn close against the morning chill. This is Attila, leader of the Huns, keeper of the great camp, master of a world that no longer sleeps. He walks without escort. Those who see him step aside, but do not bow deeply. The respect they offer is quieter, born of trust rather than fear. He pauses to speak with a herdsman whose mare has foaled overnight, to praise the boy who stands guard at the gate. He asks about the river's rise, about the sickness of a chieftain's wife, about the numbers of arrows stored for spring. Nothing escapes his notice. Power, he believes, is not kept by shouting orders, but by listening to every whisper. When he returns to his tent, the sun has cleared the horizon. Inside, the air smells of leather and cedar. Maps made of stitched hides hang from the walls, marked not with lines but with small carvings, stones for cities, bits of bone for rivers, tiny horsehair knots for allied tribes. Around a low table sit his advisors, elder warriors, translators, and 2 Roman envoys who have travelled weeks to reach him. They bring gifts, coin, wine, and a scroll sealed in purple wax. The Romans speak first, their words flowing in practiced courtesy. They praise the peace that now stretches between empire and steppe. They promise continued tribute. They flatter the strength of the Huns. Attila listens, motionless. His face gives nothing away, his eyes calm and unreadable. When they finish, he thanks them with a slight nod, then gestures to his interpreter. His reply is brief. Peace is good when it is honest, but gold cannot buy what is not kept with honor. The room falls silent. The Romans exchange glances. They understand his meaning. Promises once broken will not be forgiven twice. The audience ends politely, but they leave knowing that this quiet man holds the fate of provinces in his hands. Outside, the camp stirs with energy. Messengers ride out in every direction, carrying orders sealed with Attila's mark, a hawk in flight. Alliances must be renewed, scouts dispatched, new herds found for the growing host. The Hunnic nation has become a living network, stretching from the Danube to the Carpathians, from the forests of the north to the plains of the Black Sea. And at its center sits Attila, the still point around which all motion turns. Those who serve close to him describe his manner as neither cruel nor indulgent. He laughs rarely, but when he does, the sound is genuine and low, like distant thunder softened by distance. He eats simply, meat roasted without spice, bread coarse and plain, water or fermented milk instead of wine. He forbids drunkenness in his presence. A man who cannot hold his cup, he once said, cannot hold his word. Yet he is no austere recluse. At festivals, he rides with his men, joins in the racing, listens to the singers whose songs weave the story of their people. He rewards courage freely, sometimes with gold, sometimes with a horse, sometimes only with a clasp on the shoulder, and a few quiet words that carry greater worth than any coin. Each evening, the fires burn across the plain like a scattered city of stars. From the largest tent rises music, drums, flutes, the stringed sound of the horsehead fiddle. Storytellers speak of ancient hunts, of spirits that guard the steppe, of heroes who rode so far they found the edge of the sky. Attila listens to them all. He believes that a people without story is a people already fading. He also listens to the world beyond. Messengers arrive daily, Gothic princes seeking favour, Roman envoys begging leniency, spies whispering news of distant wars. He learns of the divisions within the Western Empire, of quarrels between generals and emperors, of provinces left unguarded. Each piece of information he stores like an arrow in a quiver, to be used when the moment demands. Despite his growing power, he remains cautious. He remembers Rugula's lessons. Victory is hollow if it leaves your people scattered. So he governs by balance, mercy to those who obey, swift punishment for those who betray. A thief who steals from another clan repays with horses. A traitor who betrays the council is exiled, not executed. The living can learn, he says. The dead cannot. Sometimes, after long councils, Attila withdraws alone to the riverbank. There he watches the current slide past, slow and strong. He sees in it the likeness of his own people, once separate streams, now joined, moving toward a sea no one can yet imagine. The reflection of the sky trembles upon the water, grey clouds, patches of light, the faintest shape of stars. He bends, scoops a handful, and lets it fall again through his fingers. Nothing stays still. That, he knows, is the law of the world. In the second year of his sole rule, omens begin to appear. A shepherd finds a sword buried deep in the earth, its blade untouched by rust. The priests of the Huns, men who read meaning in wind and fire, declare it the sword of Mars, a sign that the gods have given Attila dominion over battle itself. Word spreads quickly. By dusk, the camp is alive with song. Attila accepts the gift without display. He raises the weapon once toward the sky and says only, "If it is the will of heaven that we ride far, may it also be the will of heaven that we ride wisely." To his followers, the gesture confirms what many already believe, that their leader is chosen by fate. To the Romans, the story becomes legend. In the taverns of Constantinople and Ravenna, sailors and scribes speak of a barbarian king who wields a divine blade, whose armies are endless, whose eyes burn with fire. Myth begins its work, and fear grows faster than fact. But within the camp, daily life continues in its steady rhythm. Blacksmiths hammer arrowheads by the thousands. Women weave patterned cloth to trade with merchants from the south. Children chase one another between the tethered horses, their laughter rising above the rumble of drums. Even an empire of riders must rest between campaigns, and these moments of peace bind the Huns as firmly as any battle. At night, beneath a sky crowded with stars, Attila meets with his generals. They sit in a circle, no thrones, no banners, only the glow of a single fire between them. Maps lie spread on the ground, the Danube, the Rhine, the Alps. His finger traces the rivers like veins of destiny. Each stream flows to the same sea, he says. Each road leads to Rome. They do not yet march west. The time is not ripe. Instead, Attila strengthens his alliances. He calls upon the Ostrogoths and the Gepids to ride under his standard. He marries a noblewoman from the northern tribes, sealing kinship with those who dwell near the forests. Slowly, patiently, he builds a web of loyalty that spans half a continent. The bowstring is being drawn, but the arrow has not yet flown. Rumours reach him of discontent among the Romans, of a noble woman named Honoria, sister to the Western Emperor, who seeks freedom from an unwanted marriage. She sends Attila a ring and a plea for rescue. To him, it is more than a romantic gesture. It is opportunity wrapped in gold. He claims her message as an offer of marriage, and with it, half the empire as dowry. The Romans deny it, protest it as a misunderstanding. But the claim remains. Words, once spoken, have a way of becoming reasons. Still, Attila waits. He is a hunter who knows that patience kills more surely than haste. He sends envoys to both Eastern and Western courts, testing their responses, measuring their fear. Each ambassador returns with more tribute, more promises, more excuses. The empire pays to postpone what it cannot prevent. In these years, Attila's fame spreads farther than any rider could travel. The Franks speak of him as the Shadow King. The Burgundians tell stories of his horse's hooves sparking fire. Even among the Persians, traders whisper his name as a warning. Move swiftly, or the Hun will find you. Yet among his own people, he remains simply Attila, our leader, stern, fair, unyielding, the man who turned scattered wind into storm. One evening, a poet from a distant tribe recites before him. The song tells of an eagle that soars above mountains and rivers, seeking a place to rest. Each land it passes belongs already to another beast. The bear, the lion, the wolf. Only the open sky remains free. When the singer finishes, Attila sits for a long moment. Then he says quietly, "The eagle does not need to rest. It carries its home within its wings." Those nearby remember the line for years. As summer fades into autumn, Attila walks once more among his tents. The fires gleam against the dark fields, and the night hums with the low voices of thousands. He feels the pulse of his people around him. Strong, united, waiting. Soon, he knows, they will move again. Not for plunder this time, but for destiny. For now, the steppe is calm. The wind smells of grass and rain. Horses stand at ease, tails flicking lazily. In the distance, thunder mutters, though the sky is clear. Perhaps it is only the echo of countless hooves yet to ride, or perhaps the gods themselves stirring in their sleep. Attila turns toward the east, where dawn will rise again. His shadow stretches long behind him, touching the tents, the river, the world that is already his. He does not smile, but his eyes hold a light that seems older than fire. The leader of the Huns breathes in the cool air of the plains and whispers, almost to himself, "The sky is wide. We have not yet reached its edge." The plains are quiet, but beneath their calm hums the pulse of decision. Attila sits beside the river, tracing the edge of a broken arrowhead with his thumb. Around him, the wind moves gently, stirring the grass and the faint smoke of dying fires. Tomorrow, envoys from the Eastern Roman Empire will arrive again, bearing words polished smooth as river stones. And once more, he must decide how to balance peace and power, patience and thunder. He has learned that conquest is not always won with weapons. Sometimes the sharper blade is silence, the pause that makes others wonder what storm it hides. For years, the Romans have paid tribute, gold by the wagon load carried north to buy what they call peace. To Attila, it is not payment, but proof. Each coin a sign that the empire trembles, each gift an acknowledgement of his might. Yet the balance grows delicate. The more they pay, the more resentment festers in Constantinople's halls. And now, envoys whisper of broken promises, of refugees crossing borders, of imperial officers seizing Hunnic traders. In his great tent of dark felt, the council gathers. The air smells of horsehide and pine resin. Attila's generals, elders of many tribes, speak in low, urgent voices. Some demand war, others caution patience. Attila listens to each, head bowed slightly, his fingers resting on the hilt of his sword. At last, he speaks. "The Romans think gold buys peace," he says quietly, "but gold buys only time. And time, my friends, has run out." No one argues. They know the weight of his words. When Attila decides, the world moves. The next morning, a column of Roman envoys approaches the camp. Their robes are bright with embroidery, their sandals white from dust. At their head walks the ambassador Maximinus, his expression carefully composed. Behind him comes Priscus, the historian and diplomat, his eyes wide with both curiosity and unease. They have heard the legends of Attila's gaze that can break a man's courage, of his armies that move like wind. But nothing prepares them for the strange order of his world. They pass through ranks of mounted guards, silent, watchful, every saddle polished, every bow strung. Then into the camp itself, vast, organized, alive with purpose. Smoke rises from cookfires, traders bargain in a dozen tongues. Children play beside tethered horses. It is no horde of savages, as the Romans expected. It is a city without walls, an empire that breathes. At the heart of it stands Attila's hall, a great wooden structure framed by beams darkened with smoke. The envoys are led inside. The light is dim, the air thick with the scent of pine and roasted meat. Attila sits at a plain table, a cloak of grey wool draped over his shoulders. No crown adorns his head, no jewels on his hands, only the quiet authority of a man who knows his own strength. The Romans bow. Attila nods once. Maximinus begins to speak, his voice practiced and formal. He offers greetings from Emperor Theodosius, promises of continued peace, words wrapped in silk. Attila waits until the last phrase fades, then answers in measured tones. "You say peace," he murmurs, "but I hear excuses. You bring me words, not justice. You speak of friendship, yet you hide deserters from my lands. You send tribute late. Do you think the sky forgets the promises made beneath it?" The ambassador falters. Priscus watches, fascinated. The Huns' leader doesn't raise his voice. He does not threaten. Yet his calm carries more power than shouting ever could. Every man in the room feels it. The slow tightening of air. The awareness that this peace hangs by a thread. When the meeting ends, Attila rises. He gestures for the Romans to dine. Long tables are laid with food, roasted meats, bread, wine. But when Attila's own plate is brought, it is simple, wooden, filled with plain meat and vegetables. His cup holds water. Priscus notes the contrast carefully, sensing a lesson there. Restraint itself is a kind of rule. That night, after the envoys have retired, the council meets again. Attila's decision is swift. The tribute will double, he declares. The Romans will return the fugitives who sought shelter in their cities. And if they refuse, his riders will cross the Danube before the moon wanes. No one doubts he means it. The empire hesitates. The payments arrive late, the demands ignored. And so the Huns move. It begins like the drawing of breath. Camps empty, herds driven east to safety, forges ring day and night. Across the plains, the sound of hooves rises, echoing through the valleys. By the time Roman scouts see them, the army stretches from horizon to horizon, tens of thousands strong, riders clad in leather and iron, faces painted against the glare of sun. They cross the river at dawn. The mist is thick, muffling sound. Horses plunge into the water, archers riding high in their saddles, banners streaming. When they reach the far bank, Attila halts. He turns once to watch the sunrise behind them, the land of their ancestors fading in the light, and then faces west. "Ride," he says. The storm begins. Fortresses crumble. Towns surrender without a fight. The Huns move faster than messengers can travel. Their arrows darken the air. Their horns echo across the plains. But Attila forbids slaughter without cause. "Take what feeds us," he commands. "Leave what stands empty. Let fear walk before us. It will do half our work." Within weeks, the Eastern Empire sues for peace. The emperor's envoys meet Attila again, their pride worn thin. The new treaty triples the tribute, grants him lands for trade, and names him friend of Rome. Attila accepts with a faint smile. He has no wish to destroy Constantinople. He prefers to hold it in the palm of debt. When the Roman ambassadors return home, they report to their emperor with trembling voices. "He is not like other men," they say. "He rules as if he were born of iron and silence. He demands nothing he cannot take, and he takes only what he chooses." In Constantinople's streets, people whisper his name as a curse. In the markets, mothers hush crying children with it. "Be still, or Attila will come." And across the empire, the mere rumour of his riders sends cities to strengthen their gates. Years pass, and the Hunnic dominion spreads like the shadow of a cloud. Attila now commands not only his own people, but a host of allied tribes. Ostrogoths, Alans, Syrians, Rugians. Some serve for gold, others for loyalty, others for fear, but all obey. From his central camp, messengers ride out daily to distant commanders, carrying orders sealed with his mark. He governs this vast network not with bureaucracy, but with instinct. Each chief knows his place, his duty, his reward. Those who falter are replaced quietly. Those who excel are honored with trust. Attila's justice is swift and impartial. The smallest village under his protection can appeal directly to him, and many do. To most, he seems less a conqueror than a force of nature, unforgiving but fair. Trade flourishes in his realm. Roman merchants cross his borders under escort. Gothic craftsmen fashion weapons and jewelry for his warriors. In the evenings, foreign travelers dine at his court, astonished to find civility where they expected barbarism. He knows our laws better than we do, one Roman admits to another, and he bends them like reeds. Yet Attila himself remains unchanged. His tent is still simple, his meals plain. He laughs only rarely, but when he does, even the sternest warriors smile. To them, he is both father and storm, a man whose will binds them more tightly than chains. Still, he is not without diplomacy. When embassies arrive from the Western Empire, he receives them graciously. Among them is the envoy Flavius Aetius, a Roman general who once lived among the Huns as a youth. The two men speak long into the night, each understanding the other in a way few do. Between them grows a cautious respect, two predators circling the same world, each knowing the other's strength. But respect cannot stop the wheel of ambition. The West, rich in provinces and pride, becomes Attila's next horizon. And somewhere in Ravenna, the Emperor Valentinian's sister Honoria still wears the ring she once sent north in desperation, a ring Attila has not forgotten. For now, he waits. The Eastern Empire pays its gold faithfully, fearful of his wrath. His own lands prosper, his armies rest. But in the stillness, he senses the next call. Rome has two faces, and he has yet to look upon the second. In the quiet of night, Attila rides alone beyond the camp. The sky spreads endless above him, jeweled with stars. He dismounts beside a hill, kneels, and touches the earth. The ground is cool, steady, the same soil his ancestors rode across when they first came from the east. He closes his eyes and listens. Far away, wolves howl. A horse nickers softly behind him. The wind carries the faint scent of rain and distant pine. For a moment, he is simply a man of the plains again, one with the land that made him. He speaks softly to the darkness. I have taken what is due. I have kept what was promised. But still, the road runs west. The world beyond the mountains waits, and its silence calls my name. He rises, mounts his horse, and turns back toward the sleeping camp. The fires burn low, their embers glowing like stars fallen to earth. Tomorrow there will be councils, treaties, preparations. But tonight there is only wind, and the whisper of destiny moving through the grass. Attila rides on, a dark shape against the pale sky, until the steppe swallows him once more. The fires of conquest have cooled, and the great plains hum again with the quieter sounds of life. Herds drift like dark islands through a sea of pale grass. The slow bells on their necks chime in unhurried rhythm. Traders move along river paths without fear, their carts creaking softly beneath loads of salt, wool, and grain. From the Volga to the Danube, banners ripple in a steady wind, not as signals to charge, but as signs of dominion. The Huns have drawn breath, the sky is wide, the steppe spacious, and for a season the world holds still. Gold arrives as if poured from the sun itself. Wagons from Constantinople come with a solemn clatter, escorted by Roman soldiers who keep their eyes low. The coins spill like light across woven carpets, warm in the palm, cold in the mouth when a guard tests their bite. Men stack them in careful towers, then tip them into leather sacks sealed with iron rings. The sound, soft rain on hide, fills the hall for hours. Yet when the counting is done, Attila barely glances toward the heaps. He eats his simple meal of meat and bread, drinks water, and rises to walk the camp with quiet steps. He sees what gold changes and what it does not. It buys grain enough to see the weaker herds through a hard winter. It buys iron enough for arrowheads and cloth fine enough to line the boots of scouts who ride far in the snow. It buys wine for visiting princes and silk for the brides of allied chiefs. But it cannot buy vigilance, and he watches for the first signs of softness as a herdsman watches for wolves. When laughter grows too loud, he smiles and says nothing. When drills grow lazy, he stands unseen at the edge of the field and watches until the rhythm tightens again. Around the central fires, the wealth glows and murmurs. New ornaments catch the firelight at feasts, gilded buckles, embossed scabbards, narrow bands of twisted metal circling braids of hair. The music is richer too, furnished by instruments traded from distant markets, their tones deep and honeyed. Children press their faces to Roman glass and giggle at their own reflections. Old men run their fingers over fine woven fabrics and nod, pleased at the neatness of the weave. Peace has textures, soft felt underfoot, smooth wood polished by many hands, the sweetness of honey stored without fear of theft. Yet peace is only the surface of the steppe. Beneath it, currents move unnoticed. Envy sprouts like grass after rain. A young chieftain measures his worth by the weight of gifts he receives at court. Another wonders why Attila's messengers visit his neighbour more often than they visit him. An Alan captain's pride flares at a careless slight. A Gothic prince bristles when a treaty places him 2 seats farther from the fire than last season. No voices rise, no hands reach for knives, but the air holds a new tautness, and Attila feels it as one feels a change in the wind long before the clouds reveal its cause. The council he calls is large and bright and heavy with expectation. Tents bloom across the river meadow, round and white beneath a sky the colour of polished steel. Smoke climbs in steady spirals, and the plain smells of pine resin, horse and soup thickened with barley. When the chiefs enter the great hall, their boots thud on plank floors laid straight as river reeds. Attila stands alone before them, a staff in his hand, and a patience in his eyes that stills the room without force. "We rode west," he says, and his voice is low and even, because the wind carried us and the grass allowed it. "We live well now, because our unity is stronger than our hunger. Gold comes to us because those who fear us would rather pay than bleed. But gold is a restless servant. If you lean on it, it will slip from beneath you. Let it carry our weight for a season, and we will wake to find we have forgotten how to stand." The chiefs say little. They are not fools. They remember lean winters when the herds thinned and the children coughed through the night. They remember the first river crossings, the bitter water at dawn, the way the sky seemed to lower itself until it rested on their shoulders. Comfort is sweet, but it is not nutritious. Attila lets the silence ripen until a scent grows in it like fruit, then nods once and steps back from the brink of speech. No vows are taken, and none are needed. A current has been reset toward vigilance. In the weeks that follow, embassies pass through the camp like migrating birds, each with its own angle of flight. Roman envoys lay scrolls across low tables and speak of friendship in smooth phrases. Northern princes arrive wrapped in furs that smoke gently in the mild rain. They bring horses with manes plaited in coloured thread. A Persian merchant lingers in the market, selling glass bowls that gather lamplight like captured moons. Attila receives them all with the same courteous gravity. He listens more than he speaks. He allows others to measure the silence and learn from it what they can. One afternoon, when the air is warm and heavy and a line of swans moves east along the river, a small packet comes hidden among bolts of cloth. The seal, when broken, reveals a ring wrapped in a letter written in a slender, urgent hand. The words are precise and deeply felt. The ink bites into the fibres like a vow. It is from Honoria, sister of the Western Emperor, and it asks for rescue. It offers promise. It delivers, whether intended or not, pretext. Attila turns the ring in his fingers and watches how it catches the light. The gold is warm from having been worn. He closes his fist around it and feels its weight settle into his palm like a decision that can be postponed but not avoided. He does not hurry. Decisions are like arrows. Once loosed, they cannot be called back. He consults no oracle, lays out no carved bones. Instead, he walks the camp in long, unremarkable circuits. He asks the armourers how many arrowheads lie finished in baskets. He asks the cooks if the salted meat will hold through a second winter. He asks a boy at the gate what he hears at night when the wind shifts. He sits with a mother whose child has fever, stays until the heat breaks, and afterward hands the grateful family a small bone charm he has carried since youth. He speaks with a prince whose marriage has brought two old enemies to table. He watches wrestlers in the dust and laughs when one faints and the other falls laughing with him. He files away everything he sees, not as reasons to be kind or to be cruel, but as the measure of a body through which he intends to run a great current of will. The tribute from the east swells and steadies. The emperor's scribes have learned prudence. The wagons arrive on time. The coins ring true. The parchment bows lower with each exchange. Peace on that side ripens into a cautious rhythm that suits both giver and receiver. The West, though, has grown lax in its watching. Governors quarrel over taxes. Soldiers demand pay and idleness. The roads sink into soft places where once they ran hard as bone. In Ravenna, the sea air eats iron and patience alike. In Gaul, fields stand green and heavy, while farmers glance toward the horizon more often than they glance at the sky. Winter steps down from the north with a soft tread. Snow thickens the world. Rivers harden to silver. The camp gathers inward. The smell of smoke grows rich and homely, and the music moves closer to the fire. Men fletch arrows slowly, speaking little. Women mend cloaks with small stitches that will outlast storms. Children run with red faces and bright eyes, and return carrying wood with pride. The nights are long. In the middle hours, when even the watchfires lilt, Attila sleeps in short spans, and wakes as if he had been listening from within his sleep to a voice just outside it. He dreams of the open steppe of his youth, when the horizon was an uncluttered promise, and the only weight he carried was the bow across his back. In those dreams, the wind has a taste, cold iron and sun-warmed wool, and the horse's breath makes clouds that drift and join in shapes like continents. He wakes with the taste still on his tongue and lies in the dark, counting the steady rhythm of the guard's footsteps. Not all longings are for luxury. Some are for clarity. He rises and steps outside, pulls the night air into his lungs until he feels his edges again, and only then returns to his blankets. The letter and ring remain in his keeping, resting in a small box of carved wood near the lamp. He does not look at them often, but when he does, he looks not as a man looks at a trinket, nor as a lover looks at a token, but as a general looks at a map, to be sure it is still accurate, to imagine how a line might be drawn from here to there without breaking. When the ice begins to soften, the drills become more frequent, but the tone remains gentle, no shouting, no whips. The rhythm of hooves is music enough. Riders trace wide circles on slush-darkened fields, loose and recover, turn and loose again. The bows speak in clean syllables, and the arrows cluster in a tight, articulate group. In the evenings, the instructors walk the lines and thank the youngest with a hand on the shoulder, praise that warms longer than wine. Attila watches from a little distance, and from time to time he calls a rider forward and asks him to describe the path he took through the course. Those who can speak it clearly will ride it clearly when the course is the world. Not all work belongs to iron. Treaties require a different forge. Attila meets a Gothic prince at the edge of a winter wood, where the bark is black with wet and the needles glitter with melting frost. They stand with one horse between them and talk until their breath becomes a cloud that brushes both faces. When they part, a quarrel of 3 summers' age dissolves, like hoarfrost touched by light. An Allan captain brings a chest of carved bone and words of apology. He leaves with a lighter chest and a heavier promise. A Roman merchant, grey with worry for a son taken hostage by bandits on the frontier, arrives shaking and leaves steadied. His son returned, his gratitude measured in tears and cloth and news. The camp expands with spring, new tents bloom. A trader from the Black Sea brings a dye that stains wool a blue so deep it seems a whole night in it. Children follow him at a respectful distance as if he were a travelling cloud that might at any moment release rain. A monk in a threadbare robe asks for permission to pass and is given bread and a place by a quiet fire and a night without questions. The next morning, he is escorted to the edge of the camp and watched until he becomes a small figure among small trees, after which the guards speak his blessing softly between themselves, not because they swear by his God, but because kindness is a habit worth training as carefully as aim. When Priscus returns, he finds the camp larger than before and more precise. He notes the way refuse is carried beyond the ring of tents each morning, the way a small channel has been cut to lead runoff away from the central paths, the way the horse lines are arranged, so each animal can see the open ground. He dines again in Attila's hall and sees, not for the first time, the contrast between the plain wooden plate set before the ruler and the silver dishes that glitter beneath torchlight at either elbow. Priscus writes later that he understood, in that quiet theatre, that power borrows nothing from ornament it cannot pay back with discipline. They speak politely of tribute, of borders, of the mishandling of a caravan outside a Danubian town. Attila listens and answers in sentences smoothed by patience. Then he asks a single question that presses the air flatter than any accusation. If your emperor cannot hold his word, can he hold his world? Priscus answers with care and leaves with the sense that he has survived a narrow road in fog without falling. The snow withdraws up the hillsides and vanishes into the shade beneath trees. The rivers swell, then clear. Men lift the tent walls to let wind run through the wool. Girls decorate bridles with little bells that make a thin, bright music even at a walk. Fauns appear at the forest margin and stand, astonished by their own legs. Somewhere far off, a thunderhead climbs a blue sky as a mountain climbs from the earth, and someone says softly that the season of travel has opened like a gate. Attila rides to the boundary of the camps and looks west. He sees not a road, but a weaving of rivers and fields, towns and fords, hills and hedges. He sees the shape of a thought that will take many hooves to write. He does not hurry it. He lets it ripen as wheat ripens, quietly, with an intent that is all the stronger for making no sound. That evening, he opens the box and lifts the ring into the lamplight. It gleams as if lit from within, metals remembering the heat that made them. He weighs it once, twice, as if testing a balance, then sets it down and closes the lid. He calls for a scribe and dictates a letter measured as a bowstring, courteous, definite, undecorated. Words that leave a door ajar without making the room drafty. Afterward, he walks through the market at the hour when traders drowse and children are called home. He buys nothing. He stops to adjust a strap on a boy's saddle and to hear, with pleasure, a young woman's song that carries the pulse of hooves in its rhythm. He stands beside the corral where remounts graze and rests his hand on the withers of a mare who flicks an ear and stands calmer for his touch. He eats late, alone, and sleeps easily for a handful of hours. At dawn, he wakes before the camp and steps outside into air that smells of river and first fire. The sky is a flat, pale shell beginning to tint with gold. Horses shake frost from their backs. Somewhere, a crow makes the sound of a hinge turning. In the east, peace holds. Its gold will come on time. In the west, oaths fray. Their shadows grow longer than the men who cast them. He closes his eyes and listens, not for voices, but for the low, steady hum of a world gathered and ready. When he opens them, the horizon is the same as it has always been. Far, inviting, without judgment. He draws breath and feels in it the cool of water and the dry of grass and the warm edge of iron. Nothing rushes. Nothing hesitates. The day begins. Gold lies stacked where it must, guarded and counted and forgotten. Oaths lie where they were spoken, some bright, some cracked, all waiting to be tested. And the shadows, those useful, faithful things, stretch ahead, drawing a sketch of roads not yet ridden, borders not yet crossed, decision not yet declared. The camp stirs. A single horn sounds, low and even, like the start of a song that does not need words. Dawn spreads across the plains like a sheet of pale fire. The frost that clings to the grass melts into silver beads, and the horses stamp impatiently, steam rising from their nostrils. From every corner of the camp comes motion. The tightening of straps, the rasp of whetstones, the low murmur of orders passed from man to man. The air smells of leather and smoke, and the faint sweetness of oil rubbed into the boughs. The Huns are preparing to ride. They have ridden before, against tribes, against rebels, against the careless arrogance of Rome's borders. But never like this. Never with such purpose. Never with the horizon itself seeming to tremble before them. For years they have gathered strength and tribute. Now that tribute will feed the greatest march the steppe has ever seen. Attila stands at the edge of the encampment, his cloak lifted by the wind. Before him, the plain stretches westward into a haze of light. He does not shout, does not wave banners or raise his sword. His silence is command enough. The men know. They mount their horses, bowstrings coiled tight across their saddles, arrows rattling softly in their quivers. A murmur passes through the ranks, a sound like the sea shifting beneath ice. And then they move. The ground begins to shake. Tens of thousands of hooves strike the frozen earth in unison, rolling across the plains in a rhythm older than speech. The herds and carts follow, flanked by lines of warriors from 100 tribes: Huns, Ostrogoths, Alans, Rugians, Syrians, each wearing their own colours but bound by the same purpose. The steppe that once scattered them now sends them forward as one body, one breath, one will. They cross the river slowly, the water flashing around the horses' legs like shattered glass. Behind them, the land of their ancestors fades into mist. Before them rises the unknown, the fields and forests of Gaul, the heart of the Western world. They ride beneath clouds the colour of steel. Some hum songs to keep rhythm. Others murmur prayers to gods whose names have long lost their words. Days become a blur of movement. The world narrows to the smell of sweat and iron, the ache of saddle and bone, the endless hiss of wind in the grass. The sun sets red, rises pale, sets red again. Villages appear on the horizon, then vanish in smoke. The sound of hooves is relentless, an ocean tide rolling west. When they reach the first Roman outpost, there is no resistance. The gates stand open, the soldiers already fled. In the town square, Attila dismounts, his boots crunching over fallen grain. He looks around at the empty windows, the abandoned wells. A small cat darts across the stones and disappears. The only sound is the wind rattling the shutters. He turns to his lieutenants. "Take what we need," he says softly. "Leave the rest. Let them see we came through, not for plunder, but for remembrance." The order surprises them, but they obey. The Huns do not linger. They move on, and the towns they pass through fall silent behind them, haunted not by ruin, but by awe. Word travels faster than riders. In distant cities, bells toll warnings. Roman generals argue in marble halls, their voices echoing off pillars older than their fear. Scouts bring reports that sound like myths, that the ground itself moves, that an army without end is coming. An army led by a man who claims both heaven's sword and the hand of destiny. For the people of Gaul, the names mean little. What they know is the sound, that deep, rhythmic thunder that rolls across the hills before the riders appear. They see smoke on the horizon and know it is time to flee. They gather children and icons, drive cattle ahead of them, and follow the roads south toward hope that the empire still remembers how to protect its own. The Huns sweep onward. Their speed is their shield, their rhythm their armour. They do not wait for siege. They do not tarry for conquest. They move as a wind moves, everywhere and nowhere. One column strikes the city of Metz, another crosses the Rhine near Mainz. Rheims falls, then Tongres, then Cambrai. Each burns like a candle briefly lit and then snuffed by the wind. At the head of it all rides Attila, unhurried, calm. He wears a cloak of wolfskin and carries no crown. His eyes, they say, are the colour of weathered iron. His men call him father, his enemies the Scourge. He speaks little, but when he does, the words ripple outward through the army as if spoken by thunder itself. One night, as they camp beside a river, Attila sits apart, staring into the fire. Around him the soldiers laugh and sing, rough songs of home, of the plains, of women left waiting. The air smells of roasted meat and pine smoke. A Roman deserter sits nearby, telling stories of the great cities beyond the mountains, of Paris, shining with its cathedrals, of Aurelianum, with its markets full of gold and grain. The men listen with wonder, but Attila says nothing. When the man finishes, he lifts his gaze and asks quietly, "Do they still believe their walls can hold back the wind?" The deserter nods uncertainly. "Then they have forgotten what wind is," Attila replies, and turns back to the fire. In the days that follow, they march south. The land changes. Rolling fields give way to forests, rivers widen, towns grow larger. The people speak different tongues, wear brighter clothes, pray to the same gods in more elaborate temples. Yet everywhere they go, the same fear precedes them. The army moves like an organism, each part feeding the next. Scouts ride ahead to find the safest fords. Engineers build makeshift bridges from felled trees. The herds follow with food and leather. The discipline is uncanny. No drunkenness, no chaos, no wasted motion. Even Roman chroniclers who hate them admit this, that the Huns fight with the precision of necessity, not the madness of rage. Somewhere beyond the Loire, the Western Empire stirs. The general Flavius Aetius, once hostage among the Huns, once Attila's ally, now gathers an army to face his old companion. Visigoths, Franks, Burgundians, Romans, enemies turned brothers for fear of a greater shadow. The news reaches Attila by dawn, carried by scouts whose horses collapse from exhaustion. He listens in silence, then nods. "So be it," he says. "Let them come." The sky has room enough for all storms. Before the battle, he rides alone among his men. He passes lines of archers adjusting their quivers, cavalry sharpening their lances, herdsmen tending horses that will soon run into war. He speaks to no one, yet everyone feels his presence. They look up as he passes, straightening their backs, setting their jaws. For many, this will be the last dawn they see, and somehow that knowledge brings calm. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of rain. Somewhere far ahead, Aetius's army is already moving, a river of shields gleaming under the clouded sky. Between them lies the open plain of the Catalaunian fields. It is there that the two great currents of the age will meet. When they reach the field, the earth seems to pulse beneath their horses. The grass, trampled by thousands of hooves, gives off a faint, sharp smell. Banners rise against the storm-grey sky. Roman eagles, Gothic wolves, Hunnic hawks. Lightning flashes in the distance, the echo swallowed by the growing roar of men. Attila rides to the centre of his army and lifts his sword. The blade catches the faint light and glows as if lit from within. The noise around him fades until only the wind remains. He does not shout, does not make promises of glory or revenge. He simply lowers the sword toward the horizon. The gesture is enough. The Huns surge forward. The clash is like the meeting of mountains, a roar so vast it seems to split the sky. Arrows darken the air, horses scream, men shout prayers that vanish before they finish. The ground shakes beneath the impact of charge after charge. Dust rises thick as smoke, turning noon into twilight. The living and the dead mingle in confusion, and the plain becomes a single moving storm of flesh and steel. Attila's riders strike again and again, their arrows whistling, their blades flashing in quick, controlled arcs. They drive deep into the enemy lines, then wheel and vanish, leaving chaos in their wake. For hours, neither side yields. Blood and rain mix in the mud, the smell of iron thick enough to taste. At sunset, the storm breaks. Both armies pull back, too spent to move, too stubborn to flee. Fires burn fitfully along the ridges. The cries of the wounded rise like the lowing of lost cattle. Attila's camp is quiet. He sits alone, his armor dark with dust, his face unreadable. No one knows what he thinks. By morning, he orders a retreat. Some say it is caution, others divine command. He calls his men together and speaks softly. We have shown them our strength. Let them believe this was the end. A wise hunter does not kill all the game in one season. The army obeys. They turn east, their formation unbroken, their pace steady. Behind them, the Romans and Goths watch from the hills, too weary to pursue. The plain is silent again, save for the wind moving through the trampled grass. The Huns ride for days without stopping. Rain washes the dust from their faces. Rivers run red, then clear again. The wounded heal, the horses recover. Soon the laughter returns to the camps, soft but sure. They have survived what was meant to destroy them, and survival itself is victory. Attila rides at the front, his cloak billowing behind him like a dark banner. The battle has not broken him, it has sharpened him. He knows the West has not seen the last of his riders. He knows that Rome, for all its marble and myths, now dreams of him every night. At dusk, he looks back once more toward the fading west. The sky burns with the last light of the sun, turning the clouds to embers. For a moment, the wind falls still. Then he whispers to no one. The fields are wide. The hunt is not over. He turns his horse eastward, and the riders follow, iron against earth, thunder against silence, their shadows stretching long behind them, over the plains that have swallowed so many names. The storm has passed, but its echo will never fade. The fires of battle had faded, but the smell of iron still clung to the wind. When the Huns returned to their great camp by the river Tisza, the earth there was soft and green again. The grass bent under hoof and boot, springing back as if the land itself wished to erase the memory of war. The horses rolled in the dust, free for the first time in months, while the warriors laughed with that quiet laughter of men who have seen too much and survived. But even amid the feasts and songs of homecoming, Attila sat apart. He had led his people through storms that could have shattered empires, and in doing so had bound them tighter than any chain. Yet now that the world was calm again, the silence pressed on him in unexpected ways. A chieftain's rule, he knew, did not end when the swords were sheathed. It deepened. It was in these quiet seasons that cracks could form, small, invisible fissures that would one day split mountains. The plain was fragrant with summer. At dawn, the dew lay on the grass like silver dust, and the river shone broad and slow. Women carried pails to the water's edge. Children herded goats along the ridges. The air hummed with insects, and the faint music of strings played somewhere beyond the tents. Peace had returned, but peace is never simple. Attila rose early each morning. He inspected the horses, spoke with the healers who tended the wounded, and walked among the soldiers' fires. Many times they offered him meat or drink. He accepted neither, but he sat with them, listening. They told stories of the march through Gaul, of cities that gleamed like dreams, of rivers that stank of fear, of the endless drums that rolled before dawn. They spoke with pride and sometimes with doubt of what had been gained and what had been lost. He never corrected them, never spoke of victory or defeat. To him, war was neither. It was weather, something to endure and learn from. At night, the sky seemed closer, filled with stars that pulsed like coals. Attila often stood outside his tent, arms folded, watching the constellations shift. The old priests had names for each: the hunter, the mare, the bowstring. They said the stars were spirits of the dead, watching to see whether the living kept faith with them. He wondered what they thought of him, a man who had crossed rivers and burned cities, who now stood barefoot on the soil of home, unsure whether the silence was reward or warning. His closest companions sensed the change in him. One evening, his advisor Onegesius came quietly to his side. "The men grow restless," he said. "They do not know whether we have won or lost." Attila looked at the horizon, where the sun bled into the hills. "Then tell them both," he answered. "Victory and loss are the same meal. One feeds the body, the other the soul." Onegesius frowned. "They need more than riddles, my lord. They need a reason to be proud." Attila's gaze softened. "Let them be proud of what they still have: their wives, their horses, their breath. The Romans measure worth in monuments. We measure it in survival." That night, he ordered a feast. The drums beat slow and heavy. The fires burned high, painting the tents in shifting gold. He sat among his men for the first time since the campaign, his wooden cup filled with clear water. When the food was served, he raised his hand for silence. "My brothers," he said, "you have ridden farther than any people before you. You have crossed mountains, rivers, and fear. The world has learned our name, not because of what we destroyed, but because we endured. We return not smaller, but wiser. The plains still open before us. The gods have not closed the sky." He paused, letting the words settle into them like warm rain. Then he smiled, the faintest curve of his lips. "Eat, drink, sing. Tomorrow we work again. The horses must be shod. The grain must be ground. The empire of riders does not rest upon gold. It rests upon hands." The men cheered, and the sound rolled across the plain like thunder returning from the hills. That night, the camp was bright with laughter, and the air smelled of meat, smoke, and the wild flowers that only bloom after rain. Yet when the revels died and the stars faded pale with dawn, Attila was already awake, walking barefoot through the dew. He visited the healers' tents, where the wounded lay in quiet rows. Some had lost arms, some eyes, some memory. He spoke softly to each, his voice steady, almost tender. "You have done enough," he told them. "The steppe will remember your courage." To a young warrior who wept because he could no longer ride, he said, "Then teach others. A man who trains 10 more is worth more than a man who fights once." These small mercies were not for show. Attila believed deeply that a ruler must see every wound he caused, even if he could not heal it. The strength of a king, he once told his captains, is not in how many bend before him, but in how many stand because of him. In the afternoons he met with the elders. They spoke of trade, of roads, of tribute from the east. Messengers arrived with news that the Roman emperor had died, that another had risen, that gold still flowed as agreed. Yet all of it felt distant, like echoes from another life. The real work, he sensed, lay here, in keeping his people whole, in ensuring that peace didn't rot into weakness. When night came, Attila sometimes left the camp and rode alone. He took no guard, no light. The plains under moonlight stretched white and endless, the grass bending in waves like a sleeping sea. The rhythm of his horse's hooves was soft and steady, the only sound in the world. He would stop by the river, dismount, and let the horse drink while he knelt by the water's edge. The current whispered, telling old stories of migrations and storms, of ancestors whose names the wind still carried. He would listen until the moon sank low, then return before dawn. One night, he found a shepherd's fire still burning. The shepherd, startled, leapt to his feet. When he recognized his king, he bowed low and stammered apologies. Attila only gestured for him to sit. They shared silence for a while, watching sparks rise into the dark. Then the shepherd spoke. "My lord," he said, "the people tell stories that you were chosen by the gods to rule the world." Attila smiled faintly. "And what do you believe?" "I believe," the man said slowly, "that the gods choose no man. They choose moments, and men must fill them." Attila looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "You are wiser than most who wear crowns." He left a gold coin by the fire before he rode away. By morning, the shepherd thought he had dreamed the encounter. In the months that followed, Attila's household grew. His sons were now old enough to ride beside him. His wives managed the great camp with quiet authority. There was laughter in his tents again, the laughter of children chasing dogs, of music played at dusk, of the small peace that comes from ordinary days. Yet even in those moments, his eyes held a kind of distance. Those who knew him best said that he carried too much of the sky inside him. He could never stay long beneath one horizon, and indeed, peace began once more to unravel. Word reached him of insults from the Western court, of Roman envoys who mocked his demands, of broken agreements, of tribute delayed. The ring from Honoria still lay in its carved box, waiting. The westward road glimmered in his thoughts like a trail of light through fog. He felt the familiar pull, not anger, but momentum, as natural as the changing seasons. One night, as rain fell softly on the tents, Attila walked to the edge of the camp where the horses slept. He placed his hand on the flank of his favourite mare, feeling the slow rise and fall of her breathing. He whispered to her in the old tongue, words he had learned as a child, words of trust between man and animal, between earth and sky. She turned her head and nuzzled his shoulder. For a moment, he closed his eyes. In that touch, he remembered everything he had lost to become what he was. His youth, his simplicity, his freedom from history's gaze. The next morning, he gathered his generals. The rain had stopped. The world smelled fresh and sharp. "The West grows careless," he told them. "They believe the fields have forgotten our tread. They think the river cannot flood twice. We will remind them." He didn't speak of revenge or destiny. He spoke of balance, of oaths kept and broken, of strength tested by necessity. "A bow kept too long unstrung," he said, "forgets how to sing." The men nodded. They had been waiting for this. The murmur of anticipation rippled through the camp like a coming wind. That evening, when the fires burned low and the stars brightened above, Attila stood alone once more. The plain stretched silent before him, vast and forgiving. He thought of all he had built, the empire of riders, the brotherhood of tribes, the uneasy peace that had followed the storm. He thought, too, of what might come. The clash of armies, the songs of glory, the cost written in names. And somewhere deep within him, past pride, past fear, he felt the quiet pulse of something older and softer, a wish that the world might one day know stillness again. He whispered a prayer, not to any god in particular, but to the earth itself, to the soil that fed his horses, to the rivers that carried his reflection, to the sky that held his ancestors. "If I must ride again," he murmured, "let it be not for gold or anger, but for the song that began before me and will end after me. Let the wind remember we passed." Then he turned, walked back through the sleeping camp, and disappeared into his tent. The candles inside flickered once, then steadied. Outside, the river murmured its endless song, and the horses, sensing the change, lifted their heads toward the west. The heart beneath the helm still beat steady and sure, not of a conqueror, but of a man who had learned that even destiny grows quiet when the wind listens. The sun rose thin and red, casting a faint light over the fields of northern Gaul. Mist clung to the hollows, like breath caught between waking and dream. In the distance, the wind whispered through the tall grass that would soon be trampled into mud. Crows circled lazily above, black shapes against a pale sky. They always came early, as if the earth had already told them what was coming. For days, the two greatest armies of their age had shadowed one another across the open land, the Huns under Attila, and the coalition led by Flavius Aetius, the Roman who had once been Attila's ally, and Theodoric, king of the Visigoths. Neither army wished to be the first to strike, yet both knew that retreat was impossible. Between them lay more than a field. Between them lay the question of who would shape the world that came after. When Attila's scouts returned that morning, their horses slick with dew and dust, they brought word that the enemy was making camp near the high ridge to the west. Attila listened in silence, his gaze turned toward the low hills that rolled like sleeping beasts in the haze. The air smelled faintly of rain. He could sense the tension in his men, not fear, but a kind of waiting, as if the plains themselves held their breath. He raised his hand, and the murmuring stopped. "We will rest here," he said quietly. "The earth beneath us is good. It will remember our hooves." That night, fires dotted the valley like fallen stars. The sound of hammers striking iron rang through the dark as smiths worked to mend armor and sharpen blades. Women moved between the tents with bowls of broth and water, their faces calm, though their eyes flickered with unspoken worry. Horses shifted restlessly, their bodies gleaming in the firelight. Somewhere, a musician plucked a soft tune, not a song of war, but of home. Attila walked alone among them. He passed the soldiers lying beside their saddles, the young men tracing charms into the dirt, the veterans staring silently into the flames. When he reached the edge of the camp, he stopped and looked out across the plain. In the distance, faint and cold, he could see the glow of the Roman fires. For a long time he stood still, listening to the night's heartbeat. Onegesius approached quietly behind him. "They say the Romans outnumber us," he murmured. Attila did not turn. "They always do. And Aetius knows your ways." "Yes," Attila's voice was steady, "but he has forgotten what they mean. He has lived too long behind stone." The advisor hesitated. "And if the gods are not with us?" Attila's lips curved in something not quite a smile. "Then we remind them who we are." The next day dawned cold and grey. Clouds thickened, pressing low over the hills. The ground trembled faintly beneath the movement of thousands. By midday, both armies had taken their positions, the Romans and their Gothic allies upon the ridge, the Huns and their vast hosts spread across the lower plain. Between them stretched a wide expanse of open grass, shimmering faintly in the pale light. Attila rode before his men, his black horse tossing its head, its flanks dark with sweat. He carried the sword of Mars at his side, though no one had seen him draw it. His face was calm, his eyes bright and unreadable. He spoke without shouting. Before us stands every power that calls itself civilized. Behind us lies only the wind and the open steppe. Between them, we will make the world remember. He lifted his hand, and the drums began to beat. Slow at first, like a heartbeat, then faster, until the very ground seemed to move with it. The archers raised their bows, the cavalry tightened their ranks. The banners rippled like waves. Then, with a motion as smooth as breathing, the Huns advanced. The first arrows rose in a glittering storm, hissing through the air like rain driven sideways by wind. They struck the Roman front, splintering shields, driving men to their knees. The reply came almost instantly, a surge of heavy infantry pressing forward, their shields locked, their spears bristling. Behind them came the Gothic horsemen, roaring their war cries. The field erupted. From a distance, it might have looked like a storm rolling across the earth. Flashes of metal where sunlight broke through the clouds, waves of dust rising and falling, the dull roar of thousands of voices merging into one vast sound. Arrows fell in arcs so thick they dimmed the light. Horses screamed, men shouted, the ground turned slick beneath the weight of motion. Attila rode through it like a shadow, calm amid chaos. He gave few orders. His men needed none. They moved as one body, wheeling and striking, withdrawing and striking again. The Huns' speed was their armour, their precision, their shield. They lured the Gothic cavalry into pursuit, then encircled them in clouds of dust and death. But the Romans held firm upon the ridge. Their formations bent but did not break, and Aetius, ever patient, watched and waited. He knew Attila's strength lay in motion. He would force him to fight standing still. When the moment came, he gave the signal. The Visigoths charged. The impact was like the meeting of thunderheads. The shock of it rolled across the plain. Men vanished beneath horses. Spears snapped like twigs. For hours the battle swayed without decision. The sun dropped lower, staining the clouds red. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of blood and iron. Somewhere amid the chaos, King Theodoric of the Visigoths fell. His men, seeing him fall, surged forward with renewed fury. The line quivered, but held. Attila's archers loosed until their fingers bled, but still the enemy pressed on. By twilight, the Huns had withdrawn slightly, forming a circle of wagons around their camp, a living fortress of men and wood. The enemy dared not enter it. Attila dismounted and stood within the ring, his armour streaked with mud, his face expressionless. Around him, the wounded groaned. The dying whispered prayers to foreign gods. He looked toward the dark ridge where Roman fires now burned like stars fallen to earth. Onegesius approached, limping. "Shall we attack again at dawn?" he asked. Attila shook his head. "No, the plain has taken enough blood. Let them believe they have won. It will make them slower." He turned and gazed eastward, toward the direction of home. The wind blew cold against his face. "Tomorrow we ride." That night, no one slept. The rain began, thin, steady, washing the dust from faces, turning the field into a wide mirror of water. In its reflection, the stars seemed dim and broken. At dawn, the Romans awoke to silence. The Hunnic camp was empty. Only the smoke of their fires remained, curling like ghosts above the horizon. The crows that had circled for days descended at last, their cries echoing across the field. The Romans declared victory, and perhaps by the measures of men, they had earned it. The Huns had withdrawn, leaving the west standing. But the field they called Catalaunian would never truly belong to Rome again. The grass there would grow greener than elsewhere, fed by what the rain could not wash away. Far to the east, the Huns rode homeward under grey skies. They spoke little, their thoughts heavy with the weight of what they had seen. For some, it had been glory. For others, revelation. Even victory, they understood now, carried the taste of ash. Attila rode at the front, silent. His cloak, soaked by rain, clung to his shoulders. He had lost thousands, yet his people still followed him, unbroken, unafraid. The battle had not destroyed him, it had tempered him. He had looked into the heart of the empire and found it bleeding. As they crossed the river that marked their borderlands, the sun broke through the clouds. Its light struck the wet earth, and steam rose in faint columns. Attila lifted his hand and halted his horse. He looked back once, toward the invisible west, where the echoes of war still lingered. He did not smile. He did not curse. He simply breathed, slow and deep, as if drawing the world into himself. Then he said, barely above a whisper, "The plains remember. The rivers remember. We will return." The riders behind him bowed their heads, though none had heard the words clearly. The wind took them and carried them east, where the campfires of the Huns would burn again, and where destiny, patient as the grass itself, waited for the man who had ridden so far into legend and found, at last, the edges of his own shadow. And in that silence after battle, when the earth exhaled its grief and the sky turned pale with mourning, the crows lifted again, not in fear but in flight, black wings rising above the field, tracing wide circles that the wind soon erased. The river moved with the slow certainty of time. Its surface gleamed bronze beneath the late summer sun, rippling gently against the reeds. Across the water, the plain stretched wide and pale, grass shimmering like silk in the wind. To the west, the faint smell of smoke still clung to the air, the ghost of battles long finished. To the east, autumn was coming, quiet and sure. Attila stood on the riverbank and watched the currents slide past. The Danube had always been a boundary, sometimes a shield, sometimes a bridge, always a reminder that peace and war were separated only by the breadth of water. He bent down, scooped a handful, and let it slip through his fingers. The sunlight caught the drops as they fell, scattering them like coins. He had returned home months ago, yet something of the battle still clung to him. The clash at the Catalaunian plains had left neither victory nor defeat, only an emptiness that words could not fill. The Romans called it triumph, the Huns called it lesson. But in truth, it was neither. It was a pause, a moment between storms, the kind that makes even the sky hold its breath. Around him, life had resumed. The camps near the Tisza hummed with the sound of renewal. Smiths hammered metal back into order. Herders drove their flocks through the tall grass. Traders returned to the markets with baskets of salt and wool. The smell of roasting meat carried on the evening air, mingling with the sweetness of fermenting mare's milk. The people had endured, and in their endurance was its own kind of triumph. Yet beneath the rhythm of daily life lay an undercurrent, quiet, persistent, uneasy. The young men spoke in whispers of lost comrades. The elders, who had seen many wars, looked to the horizon with the weary eyes of those who know that peace is only a guest. And among them all moved Attila, silent, thoughtful. His gaze turned inward even when his body sat among them. He rose before dawn each day, long before the camp stirred. He walked the empty paths where dew silvered the grass, listening to the faint rustle of life awakening. Sometimes he stopped at the shrines built by his ancestors, small cairns of stone and carved wood, adorned with bits of bone and coloured thread. He would place a piece of bread upon them, or pour a few drops of milk, and whisper in the old tongue, "For the riders before us, for the ones who still guide the wind." When he returned, the camp was alive. Horses were saddled, fires rekindled, the air thick with movement. His sons, Elak and Dengizic, often waited for him, eager to ride. They were strong and clever, proud young men who carried the restless energy of a new generation. Attila watched them spar with wooden swords, their laughter sharp in the morning light. He loved them fiercely, though he seldom said so. He wanted them to understand what power meant, not its glory, but its weight. In the evenings, he called them to his tent. There, beneath the soft light of oil lamps, he would tell them the old stories, of how their people had followed the rivers west, of how unity was forged not from conquest, but from faith and endurance. A kingdom is not a horse you can ride forever, he told them. It must be fed, guided, rested. Treat it as you would your own mount, firm in command, gentle in care. Sometimes they listened, sometimes they argued, eager for adventure. Attila only smiled. He remembered being young. He remembered the same hunger that once drove him across the steppe, chasing horizons that always seemed one day further away. But now, the chase had changed. When envoys arrived from Constantinople, bearing gifts and assurances of continued peace, Attila received them with grace. He sat in his wooden hall, flanked by chieftains and advisors, his face calm as a carved mask. The Romans bowed deeply, their words polished and ornate. They spoke of treaties, of friendship, of trade. He answered them softly, "Peace is like this river. It moves only when both sides flow together." They smiled and nodded, but their eyes betrayed their unease. They had seen his armies. They had heard the stories. To them, Attila was still the Scourge, the rider of nations. They could not understand that power was not the same as appetite. After the audience, when the Romans had gone, Attila lingered by the fire. Onagesius entered, carrying a cup of wine. "They fear you still," the advisor said. "Even their smiles tremble." "Fear is a shadow," Attila replied. "It keeps men moving, but it cannot hold them forever." "You could use that fear again," Onagesius said carefully. "The West grows weak. Their emperor hides behind his walls. Their armies quarrel among themselves. You could strike once more, not for tribute, but for destiny." Attila's gaze flickered toward the flames. For a long time he said nothing. Then, quietly, "Perhaps. But even destiny grows weary of being chased." Onagesius did not press him. He bowed and withdrew. Later that night, Attila dreamed. He stood once more on the Catalaunian plain. Though the air was silent and the bodies were gone, the field was green again, the grass whispering softly in the wind. Across it rode a single rider, a figure clad in light, faceless and slow. When it came near, he saw that the figure carried a bow, but no arrows. It stopped before him and said, "The sky remembers what the earth forgets." Then it turned and vanished into the mist. He awoke with a start, the sound of the river still in his ears. The moonlight fell pale across the tent. For a moment, he sat in the quiet, his hand pressed to his chest. The dream left no fear, only a strange calm, as if some hidden door had opened, showing him a room he had always known was there. The next morning, he rode alone along the Danube. The air smelled of pine and distant rain. Birds rose from the reeds as he passed, their wings flashing silver in the light. He followed the river for hours until he reached a small village of fishermen who bowed as he approached. They offered him bread and a place to rest. He declined both, but he sat with them a while, watching the water. One of the elders, his face carved deep by years, spoke. "My lord," he said, "the river gives, and the river takes. Some years it floods and drowns our fields. Other years it shrinks and leaves the fish dead in the mud. Yet we still thank it. Without its change, there would be no life." Attila nodded slowly. "So it is with men," he said. "Without struggle, we would forget how to breathe." He left them with a sack of grain from his saddlebags, then turned his horse back toward the camp. The wind carried the faint echo of a song, a fisherman's tune, simple and old. It followed him long after he could no longer hear it. Days passed. The leaves turned gold. Messengers came and went, carrying rumors of unrest in Rome, of new alliances forming, of kings rising and falling like reeds in the wind. Attila listened, but his mind wandered elsewhere. The river had found its reflection in him. He felt its pull, not toward conquest, but toward understanding. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, he gathered his closest companions. They sat around a low fire, the sky streaked with violet and red. "Tell me," he asked them, "what is it we seek when we ride to war?" "To live," said one. "To rule," said another. "To be remembered," murmured a third. Attila smiled faintly. "All true," he said. "And yet, the river remembers none of it. It remembers only the path it must take to reach the sea." He looked into the fire for a long while. The flames danced and twisted, their shapes never the same twice. "Perhaps the gods made us like the river," he said softly. "We move, we change, we carry others with us. And one day, when our strength is gone, we return to the sea and begin again." The others were silent. The fire crackled. Beyond it, the wind rose, carrying the scent of rain from the west. That night, a storm swept across the plains. The wind tore through the tents, and the thunder rolled like drums from a distant army. The Danube swelled, its surface wilder foaming. Lightning flashed over the water, illuminating the camp in brief bursts of ghostly white. Attila stood outside, his cloak whipping around him. The rain struck his face like shards of glass, but he did not move. He watched the storm rage across the sky and felt no fear. The river roared beside him, vast and alive. He raised his arms as if to greet it and shouted into the wind, "I am still here!" His voice vanished in the thunder, carried away by the storm. But when dawn came and the sky cleared, The world was fresh again, washed clean, gleaming beneath the light. The river had receded, calm once more, as if nothing had happened. Attila returned to his tent. His men found him later, seated quietly, his armor polished, his expression unreadable. He looked older perhaps, but not weaker, only more still. For a few brief months, peace held. The Huns traded with their neighbours, the Roman envoys came with gifts, and the plains turned green again. But the wind, as always, began to shift. And as it did, Attila looked west once more. Not as a conqueror hungry for plunder, but as a man standing on the shore of his own life, listening to the river whisper its endless song. He knew it then, though he told no one. Every river must meet the sea, and his journey, too, was drawing near. The summer had ripened to sweetness, and the plains breathed like a sleeping animal. Warm wind flowed across the tents and combed the grass into long, bright waves. The herds moved slowly at dusk, their shadows stretching thin and soft. In the great camp beside the Tisa, carpenters finished a new archway of polished wood. Weavers hung fresh-dyed cloth that held the blue of evening even in daylight. Musicians tuned strings until their notes hovered like swallows above the fires. It was a season for weddings. Alliances had to be honoured, promises bound with bread and salt, and songs given to the future so that it would not arrive empty-handed. And so the messengers rode from tent to tent with tidings that stirred both curiosity and quiet joy. Attila would take a new wife. Her name, they said, was Ildiko, a name like the bell of a small river, bright and clear. Some whispered she was noble, a daughter of distant kings. Others said she was chosen for her steadiness, a moon to balance the great tide of his life. In either telling, the story felt right. Even a man who had ridden the edge of every horizon might wish, at last, for a gentle harbour. Attila did not speak much of the wedding. He listened as the women decided the colour of the veil and the pattern on the marriage cloth. He nodded when the musicians asked whether the song should begin low and rise toward midnight. He asked only one thing, that the feast be generous and the blessings unadorned. Let simple words carry what heavy words cannot, he said, and they understood. The day came quietly, as important days often do. Dawn lifted a pale gold rim along the far hills. The river kept its steady voice. Children woke first and ran, carrying reeds tied with ribbons of red and green. Horses were brushed until their coats shone like wet stone. Chiefs and princes arrived wearing their finest, their belts bright with metal, their boots cleaned to a soft gloss. Gifts were set out on low tables, a saddle stitched with thread the colour of dry wheat, a mirror framed in polished horn, a bowl of amber beads that caught the light like trapped sunsets. When Ildiko stepped from her tent, a hush moved through the crowd, like wind through tall grass. She wore a dress the colour of winter sky, simple and luminous. Her veil fell like a quiet waterfall, and beneath it, her eyes held a calm that did not seem small in the shadow of the day. Women sang as she walked, the melody steady as a heartbeat. Attila came to meet her, no crown, no golden brooch, only a plain dark cloak and the sword at his side. He lifted the edge of her veil and smiled, a small, true smile that those nearest would remember for the rest of their lives. They stood before the elders on a carpet woven with old symbols, spirals for the rivers, arrows for the roads, a circle for the year. Bread was broken and dipped in salt. milk was poured upon the earth for the ancestors. The vows were few and soft, to share hunger and harvest, storm and shelter, to carry one another's names across the years as carefully as a rider carries water in a dry land. The elders spoke in turn, not of power, but of patience and kind speech, of how a tent is strong when two poles bear its weight. Afterward, the feast began. Torches were lit as the sun thinned, and the camp became a floating city of fire. The air smelled of roasting meat and sweet drink. Laughter braided itself through the music until you could not tell where one ended and the other began. Dancers traced slow, turning steps that imitated the pattern of stars. Drums answered with rhythms shaped like hooves on earth. Between songs, old men told stories of courtship and foolishness and luck, and the young leaned in to catch every word. Attila sat at the head of the long table, Ildiko at his right hand. He ate sparingly, as he always did, plain meat, fruit from a wooden bowl, water from a clear cup. He listened with real pleasure to the singers, and when a warrior recited a poem made for the occasion, light as a ribbon, strong as a girth, Attila laughed, not loudly, but with a warmth that reached the poet's eyes. From time to time he turned to Ildiko and spoke a few words, and she answered with the unhurried tone of someone who has learned her own breath. As the moon rose, silvering the edges of every tent, the musicians softened their pace. The wide night pressed close, not heavy, but full of listening. People drifted toward their fires in small clusters. Children slept across their mothers' laps. Dogs curled beneath benches. The last bowls were cleared. The last stories slid into silence like boats pulled ashore. Attila rose and thanked the elders for their blessings, the guests for their presence, the musicians for their art. "You have given us a good beginning," he said, "and good beginnings are the best kind of prophecy." He lifted his cup, not of wine, but of water, and those who saw it remembered anew that restraint had always been the harness of his strength. When he and Ildiko stood to leave, the crowd parted as grass parts for wind. Soft cheers rose, more blessing than noise, and the torches along the path flickered as if bowing. Their tent was new and unadorned, set slightly apart so the night could gather around it like a cloak. Inside, the lamps were turned low. The carpet underfoot still held the faint scent of dye. Outside, the guard posted at a respectful distance heard small sounds. The whisper of fabric, the quiet fall of a cup upon wood, the private grammar of two people learning the shape of a shared room. The guard settled his cloak around his shoulders and looked at the moon. It was round and generous, and the river answered it with a bar of pale light. Sometime after midnight, the wind changed. It came cooler from the north, bringing the smell of distant rain and the clean taste of far grass. In the easternmost tents, sleepers shifted, sensing the new edge to the air. A horse lifted its head and snorted softly, then returned to stillness. In the hall where the empty bowls waited to be washed, a candle burned down to its last language and went out. Near dawn, silence narrowed. The river's voice grew small, as if it, too, were listening. A messenger, young, careful, and pale about the mouth, came from the tent's shadow and moved across the camp with his steps wrapped in the quiet that follows news. He spoke first to Onegesius, who closed his eyes, opened them, and lifted a hand that did not shake. Then to the elders, who stood as if the earth beneath them had stepped away and then returned. Then to the captains, whose faces learned how to hold still. By the time the sun rose, a white ring of light along the world's edge, the news had settled like dew. In the night, in the place where joy and privacy braid their threads, Attila had gone from breath to no breath. No shout carried it, no wail flew. The camp did not break into panic or noise. A deeper quiet fell, the kind that belongs to winter mornings and first snow. Ildiko remained within, veiled again, still as a small lake before wind. Women moved around her in circles of help, bringing water, bringing air, bringing the difference between alone and unattended. They did not ask questions. They smoothed the cloth where it wrinkled, drew the lamp's flame smaller, kept the world gentle. Outside, the guards stood with their eyes on the middle distance, their hands empty, their bodies making a boundary that felt more like prayer than protection. The elders met under an open sky. Words were measured like grain. There would be no clamour, no frantic judgments. The first duty was to hold the people steady so grief could find its proper shape. Onagesius spoke of order and kindness. The head of the horse herd spoke of quieting the mares. The priests spoke few words, and all of them were simple. The rider had crossed a new river, and the river had carried him. They chose songs that would not startle the young or reopen the old wounds of the veterans. The singers came and sat on the earth and let their voices begin at the level of breath. They sang not of war, but of returning, of the way the sky keeps every road, of how the grass remembers every hoofprint without ever ceasing to be grass. Men removed their helmets. Women folded their hands. Children watched with the solemn interest children have at the edge of mysteries. Gifts were brought quietly to the threshold of the great tent. A saddle polished to a low shine. A pair of reins dyed the colour of dusk. A bowl of clear river water catching a small piece of the sky. A young groom led Attila's favourite horse to stand nearby, the animal's ears pricked forward, its eye steady and dark. The horse stamped once, not impatiently, but as if testing the earth for steadiness, and then stood again with the stillness of a tree. Throughout the day, memories moved softly from mouth to mouth. None were about conquest. They were about mornings, about the time Attila stopped to tighten a child's stirrup before a long ride, about the day he waited with a wounded herdsman until the fever broke, about the way he never took the biggest portion, even when he alone had earned it. A blacksmith recalled how the leader once asked whether the hammer's handle hurt his palm and had sent for softer leather to wrap it. A singer remembered being afraid to sing a new song, and how Attila had said, "Begin low. The sky will meet you halfway." The river did what rivers do. It went on. The camp followed its example. Pots were stirred, herds were watered, babies slept. The ordinary continued, and in doing so, it held the extraordinary, without letting it spill. As the sun inclined, the elders gathered the people in a wide half-circle open toward the west. The air had the taste of rain again, though the sky remained clear. Onagesius stepped forward and spoke in a voice that never rose. He gave us many roads. He asks us even now to walk them not in fear but in measure. We will carry his name by how we bear one another. No boasts, no hard vows, no iron against iron, only the wide measure of breath passing from chest to chest. When evening came, the torches were lit, but fewer than on a feast night. Light lay gently on the faces gathered, and shadows gathered gently behind them. The singers began the last song. one used for the great but spoken as tenderly as for the least. It told of a rider who follows the white track of the Milky Way and finds there not a throne, but a camp of quiet fires where those who rode before him wait with water and bread. It told, too, of those who remain, how they lift the tent walls to let the wind move through, how they rub the horses' knees after a long day, how they speak to one another softly when words grow heavy. Ildiko, veiled, listened. What passed beneath that veil belonged to her alone. Those who sat near her felt something steady emanate from where she was, as if a lamp had been placed behind stone, not enough to dazzle, more than enough to guide a step. Night deepened. The stars became a visible order. Somewhere far off, a wolf called once, and the horses did not start. A child grew drowsy and was lifted, and the child's head found a shoulder. A woman's hand found a hair ribbon and loosened it. A kettle sighed and then went quiet. In the last hour before midnight, the leaders met again. Maps lay unrolled, not to rename the world, but to hold it still while choices were shaped. The names of sons were spoken. The names of loyal chiefs were spoken. The river, always practicing continuity, served as their model. No decisions were declared. Rather, they began to take on the slow breath of inevitability as winter begins in the turn of leaves long before any snow appears. By then, the moon had climbed well above the rim of the world. Its light silvered the pathway where Attila had walked with Ildiko only the night before. The same cloths hung along the archway. The same carpenter's handiwork caught and held the bright edge of the sky. The camp slept at last, not from forgetfulness, but from trust in the rhythm that had carried them across deserts of time. Waking and resting, riding and returning, losing and keeping. In the lamplight of the elder's tent, a single moth lifted and fell and lifted again, the small beating of its wings making a sound that was nearly no sound at all. Somewhere near the river, a reed brushed another reed and made a note like a flute practicing kindness. The water replied, patient, unastonished. The stars threw a pale road westward, and even those who did not look up seemed to walk upon it. When morning came, it would bring the work of the living, messages to send, oaths to renew, a people to keep in one piece as a leather thong keeps a bundle from untying. It would bring, too, the first faint lines of edges forming where there had been only a single shape. The natural result of a great weight lifted and many smaller weights learning how to stand. But for now, the wedding torches had burned to quiet coals, and the night did what nights do best. It held everything without judgment. The river went on. The horses breathed. The veil lay where it lay. And the camp, feeling the absence as a presence large enough to shelter under, rested within it, listening for the smallest noises of the future as if they were already woven with the past. The dawn after the morning broke pale and fragile, like thin ice over a quiet stream. The sky was washed in grey, and the grass glistened with dew that looked, to many, like tears the world itself had shed. No trumpet sounded. No voice called the herds. For the first time in memory, the camp of the Huns woke without command. The fires of the night before still smouldered, sending thin coils of smoke into the chill air. Men moved slowly, speaking in low voices. Some tended to their horses. Others sat alone, sharpening weapons more from habit than purpose. The ground felt different beneath them. Lighter, almost uncertain, as though the great weight that had once pressed it firm was gone, and now the world itself did not know how to stand. In the centre of the camp, before the wooden hall that had served as Attila's seat, the elders gathered. Their faces were drawn, their eyes red from sleeplessness. Onegesius stood among them, his cloak damp with mist. He looked toward the tent that still held the body of his king. The entrance was sealed with white cloth, the symbol of a journey completed. No one entered, not even his sons. The body would remain untouched until the hour chosen by the priests, who had read the flight of birds and the shape of the clouds to determine the time. Beyond the camp, the river murmured, unchanged. Its current, steady and unbroken, seemed to mock the stillness of men. Onegesius spoke softly. The herds wait. The tribes wait. We must decide how they will be told. An older chieftain answered, his voice trembling. We will tell them as he would have wished, with dignity. No panic, no sorrow that weakens the hand. The world watches us, and the gods too. Another added, but who will speak for him now? Who will take his place? The question hung in the air like mist that refused to lift. The words spread outward in ripples, slow but unstoppable. Messengers rode from camp to camp bearing the news wrapped in silence. When they arrived at distant villages, no drums announced them. They simply dismounted, bowed their heads, and spoke a single sentence. The listeners bowed in return, touched their hands to the ground, and then went back to their work. Across the steppe, the rhythm faltered. Markets emptied, smithies went quiet. Warriors who had ridden with Attila since their youth now sat in the shade of their tents, staring at their hands as if they no longer recognized them. Women sang songs of endurance, low, steady tunes that kept grief from becoming chaos. In the western lands where Roman governors listened for any hint of weakness, the news was met with disbelief first, then cautious celebration. The scourge is gone, one senator whispered in Rome, half in awe, half in relief. Bells rang in churches, prayers of thanksgiving rose in every city. Yet even as they rejoiced, a shadow of fear remained. The memory of what he had been was not so easily buried. To the east, the emperor in Constantinople received the message with a mix of reverence and calculation. The gods have done what we could not, he murmured. But he knew better than to think peace would follow. The Huns were not one man, they were a storm given many voices. In the camp beside the Tisa, Attila's sons gathered. There were three, Elak, Dengizich, and Ernak, each strong, each proud, each born beneath a different constellation of their father's vast ambition. Elak, the eldest, spoke first. The empire is ours. Our father left it to us together as he ruled it. We will lead as brothers. Dengizich frowned. Brothers share a hearth, not a throne. We cannot ride one horse with 3 hands on the reins. Ernak, the youngest, quiet and watchful, said nothing. He looked at his brothers with eyes that saw further than pride, but knew better than to speak against it. The argument began softly, as all great divisions do. But within days, the lines hardened. The chiefs chose sides, the camps divided. Men who had fought shoulder to shoulder under Attila now measured one another with suspicion. Onegesius tried to hold them together. You are sons of the same fire, he pleaded. Do not let it go cold before its ashes have cooled. But fire, once it loses its center, spreads in ways no hand can guide. The funeral was held under the full moon. The air was heavy with scent, burning herbs, sweet resin. the faint perfume of crushed grass beneath thousands of feet. The people gathered in concentric circles around the great tent. Torches flickered like stars fallen close to earth. The priests, dressed in white and grey, came forward chanting in the old tongue. They spoke of the eternal journey, of the rider who crosses from this world to the next on the back of his favourite horse, his path lit by the eyes of his ancestors. When they opened the tent, the crowd fell silent. Attila lay upon a bier of carved wood, dressed not in gold or armour, but in the garments of a traveller. Leather boots, a plain tunic, a cloak clasped with a single silver pin. At his side rested the sword of Mars, its blade wrapped in linen. His hands, folded upon his chest, seemed still ready to command. They placed his horse beside him, adorned with ribbons and a simple bridle. They sang of the sky road, of the wind that never ends, of the endless pasture beyond the stars. Then, as tradition demanded, they buried him in secret. The procession moved at night, torches dimmed, through the mist along the river. None but the chosen few knew where the grave was made. When it was done, those few did not return. Some say they were slain to keep the secret. Others say they followed him willingly, believing that to guard the resting place of their king was the purest form of faith. When dawn came, only the river bore witness. Its waters rolled calmly over the hidden tomb, whispering as it had before, as if it had always known it would keep this secret. The days after the burial were uneasy. Without Attila's voice, decisions faltered. Chiefs sent envoys to the sons, seeking clarity. The sons sent envoys back, demanding loyalty. The alliance that had once stretched across continents began to tremble like a bridge too long without repair. In distant corners of the empire, vassal tribes sensed the weakness. The Goths, who had bent their knees, began to rise again. The Gepids, silent too long, gathered their riders. Even among the Huns themselves, whispers grew. That perhaps the gods had withdrawn their favour, that perhaps the sword was cursed now that its bearer lay beneath the river's song. Elec tried to restore order. He called the chiefs together, promising stability, promising strength. "We will honour him by holding what he built," he said. "Our father's shadow still covers us." But the shadow, once a shelter, now felt like weight. The tribes remembered their own customs, their old kings, their freedom. The bonds that fear and respect had tied began to fray. Autumn came early that year. The air turned sharp, the grass brittle underfoot. Across the plains, the camps began to drift apart. Old alliances turned brittle. New ones formed from necessity rather than trust. Elec rode east to put down rebellion among the Gepids. The battle that followed was brief and brutal. For a moment, it seemed he might succeed, but the gods who once favoured his father had grown silent. He fell in the fighting, and with him fell the last fragile hope of unity. When the news reached the main camp, Onegesius wept. He had served Attila and his kin for half a lifetime, but he knew the truth before anyone spoke it aloud. The empire of the Huns had ended not with conquest or betrayal, but with the quiet unravelling that follows when the centre of a great circle disappears. Dengizic and Ernak divided what remained, one taking the eastern lands, the other the west. Their followers grew fewer with each passing season. The steppe that had once echoed with the thunder of countless hooves now heard only scattered groups of riders, each small, each proud, each going their own way. Still, the stories of Attila lived. Around the fires, the elders told children how their king had stood before the walls of Rome and spared it, how his gaze had made emperors tremble, how he had eaten from a wooden plate, though his armies carried mountains of gold. The children listened wide-eyed, and though the world beyond their camp grew smaller, their imaginations kept it vast. Traders from the south spoke his name with awe and fear. Priests in Rome preached that he had been a scourge sent by God to humble the proud. Poets called him the last great rider of the world that was. Even the river, rolling endlessly past his hidden grave, seemed to speak his name when the wind was right. But in the hearts of his people, the memory was gentler. They remembered not the conqueror, but the man who had shared their bread, who had walked their fires at night and asked after their children, who had looked at the horizon and seen more than land, who had seen possibility. Winter settled upon the plains. Snow fell in slow, thick flakes, covering everything in equal measure: the tents, the fields, the forgotten tracks of armies. The river froze at its edges, whispering still beneath the ice. In the stillness, Ernak dreamed. In his dream, he saw his father standing upon a rise, the wind tugging at his cloak. Attila turned, not stern, but smiling. He held out his hand as if to point towards something far beyond the dream's edge. When Ernak woke, he walked to the river. The dawn was cold and blue. He stood where the water curved gently and whispered into the mist, "I will not forget." And perhaps, somewhere beneath the quiet surface, the current shifted, carrying his words away to join the 1,000 others already flowing toward the sea. The stories, the songs, the whispers of a people whose empire had vanished into the horizon, yet whose spirit still rode upon the wind. For though the rider was gone, the steppe remained. The grass still bent, the stars still shone, and the world, forever changed, continued to breathe beneath the endless sky. The snow melted early that year. By the time the first cranes flew north, the plains were already turning green again, and the rivers swelled with the cold water of renewal. But among the scattered camps of the Huns, spring brought not rebirth, but remembrance. Smoke from their fires rose thinner now, and the songs that once carried for miles seemed smaller, quieter, as if the wind itself no longer knew which direction to take. The empire that Attila had bound together by strength and vision had not died in a single blow. It had faded, gently but relentlessly, like the embers of a great fire losing their colour. The tribes still rode, the horses still grazed, the children still learned to shoot from the saddle, yet the unity that had made them thunder across half the world had thinned into a dream retold around evening fires. In the hush between stories, they could almost hear it again. That far-off echo of hooves, that low chant of warriors crossing the horizon. In the mornings, mist hung over the river valleys, soft as smoke. Women carried water in silence, men repaired worn saddles or sat sharpening blades that would likely never be used again. The Huns had not vanished. They had simply dissolved, scattering like seeds across the land. Some joined Gothic neighbours, taking wives and new names. Others drifted east toward the Volga, where the vast grasslands met the edges of forgotten kingdoms. The old banners were rolled and stored. The carved standards of the clans were given to children as toys. Yet in every camp, one story remained untold and alive, that of the man who had once made the earth itself tremble beneath his will. Ernak, Attila's youngest son, rode often along the river in those days. He was not a man of conquest like his brothers, nor one of rage or glory. The years had made him patient, cautious, watchful, almost scholarly in his quietness, When he rode, it was not to measure borders, but to listen. The sound of the wind through the reeds, the creak of the saddle, the whisper of water, all of it seemed to speak to him. Sometimes he would dismount and place his palm on the ground, feeling for something that was no longer there, but might still return. The elders, seeing him, murmured that he was more priest than prince. Yet they also said he understood something the others had forgotten, that a people is not only what it conquers, but what it remembers. Ernak remembered everything. The nights when his father's laughter rolled across the camp like thunder, the songs sung for victory, the smell of smoke from 100 cooking fires, the hush that followed Attila's passing. He carried those sounds and scents like relics. When he visited the villages of his people, the old warriors bowed to him, though he asked for no ceremony. He spoke kindly, asked about their herds, praised their craftwork. At each stop, he listened to their stories, and in return, told them one of his own, of a river that ran through all lands, unseen but eternal, of riders who followed it not for conquest, but for meaning. The listeners nodded. They understood, even if they did not have words for what they understood. One evening, Ernak gathered his councillors beneath the open sky. The moon was bright, and the air smelled of thawed soil. "Our people are scattered," he said. "Each tribe rides alone. Yet when the wind moves, all grass bends together. If we cannot be an empire, then let us be what we were before, the breath of the plains. We will live not by holding land, but by holding memory." His advisors looked uncertain, but they did not argue. None could remember the last time a ruler had spoken not of war, but of continuity. And so, under Ernak's quiet guidance, the Huns began a new life, smaller, humbler, but enduring. They became the keepers of horses, the traders of furs, the tellers of tales. Their camps dotted the plains from the Black Sea to the Don, flickering like a constellation across the dark fabric of history. To the empires that bordered them, they were ghosts, reminders of something vast and terrifying that could no longer be seen, but still haunted the imagination. In Roman towns, mothers still hushed their children with the old warning, "Sleep, or the Hun will come." But when travellers from the south encountered the real Huns, they found not monsters, but quiet herdsmen, skilled craftsmen, and traders who spoke many languages. Their faces were lined by the same winds that had once carried them to Rome's gates, but their eyes now reflected only peace. From time to time, however, a spark of the old fire would flare. A quarrel between tribes, a dispute over grazing lands, an insult remembered, and suddenly the riders would gather again, swift and sure, their arrows flying with the same terrible precision. But the fury faded as quickly as it came. The next morning, they would trade apologies and move on. War, once their language, had become only a dialect, remembered but rarely spoken. Ernak kept to his father's hall near the Tisa, though the roof had been mended with plain timber and the walls no longer gleamed with tribute. He ruled from there as a shepherd rules his flock, by presence, not decree. His sons grew to manhood and learned both the bow and the plough. They spoke of rebuilding what had been lost, but he only smiled and said, "The wind rebuilds nothing, it only carries." On clear nights, he would walk to the river bank and look up at the stars. Somewhere beyond them, he imagined, his father was still riding, not toward conquest, but toward understanding, following that same unseen current that moved beneath all things. The priest said the sky was a pasture where heroes rested, each star a fire lit by the spirits of the great. But Ernak thought differently. No, he told his son one night. The stars are not fires waiting for us. They are windows looking down, watching how we remember. His son frowned. And what if we forget? Then the sky will close, Ernak said, and the wind will grow silent. Beyond the plains, the world changed. Rome itself cracked and withered. Armies marched under new banners, speaking new tongues. The cities that had once feared Attila now struggled to recall the shape of his shadow. Scholars argued over whether the Huns had been demons or saviors. Chroniclers turned his name into myth, twisting it through legend and scripture until it was no longer clear whether he had been man or omen. But among the Huns, the stories were softer, closer to truth. They said that Attila had never truly died. He had simply ridden ahead, across the unseen river, to prepare the pastures beyond. On nights when the wind blew from the west, the old riders claimed they could hear him. The faint echo of hooves striking clouds, the whisper of laughter carried through the long grass. The younger men smiled at the tale, but they listened all the same. Some even swore they had seen a shadow on the horizon, a rider outlined by the last red light of sunset, always just one rider, always moving west. The generations turned, as they always do. Camps became villages. Villages became memories. The descendants of the Huns learned new languages, took new gods, raised new children who would never see the wide plains their ancestors had called home. And yet, something remained. An instinct, perhaps, a rhythm in the blood. Even in distant lands, the children of those riders still stood with their faces to the wind and their feet restless for the road. The world called them by different names now, but in their hearts the old pulse continued. The love of movement, the refusal of walls, the certainty that the horizon is not a limit but an invitation. One winter, when Ernak was old and his beard had turned white as the river's edge, he dreamed of his father again. Attila stood in the same vast meadow he had seen years before, but this time the light was softer, almost golden. He said nothing. He simply raised his hand and pointed east, where dawn was breaking. Ernak followed his gaze and saw the sun rising over fields that seemed endless, brighter and greener than any in the waking world. When he awoke, he knew it was time. He called his sons and told them, "You will go your ways, but keep the fires burning. The world forgets easily. Do not let it forget too quickly." He died at dawn as the first birds began to sing. They buried him near the river, close to where his father's secret tomb was said to lie. No mound marked his grave, only a ring of smooth stones and the whisper of grass. But those who passed that way afterwards said the place felt different, lighter, as if the air itself remembered his name. Years later, a Roman traveller wrote of passing through a small settlement along the Danube. "There are people here," he wrote, "who call themselves the children of the wind. They speak of a great king who once united them all. They say his spirit rides still, and when storms come from the east, they do not hide. They stand in the open and listen, for they believe it is him returning." His words were carried west, copied by monks, stored in dusty libraries where no wind ever reached. But the people he described needed no books. They had the steppe, the river, the stars. That was their scripture. And so the world turned, as it always does. New empires rose from the soil where the Huns had ridden. Cities built on the ashes of their camps grew tall, then crumbled again in their own time. But the wind, that ancient witness, never ceased its wandering. It still whispered across the plains, over graves long hidden and rivers long renamed, carrying with it a memory too vast to die. Sometimes at dusk, when the sun turns the horizon to gold and the grass moves like water, travellers say they hear a distant echo, the rhythm of hooves, faint but steady, fading westward. They turn to look, and there is nothing, only the wind and the endless, remembering earth. Evening settled gently over the plains, as though the sky itself were tired from carrying so much memory. The wind came first, low and steady, curling through the tall grass, brushing the surface of the river like a hand smoothing a child's hair. It carried the smell of rain and of smoke and of time. The light was golden, stretched thin across the horizon, and every blade of grass seemed to shimmer in farewell. There were no kings now, no banners, no armies. The world had turned many times since Attila's death, and with each turning, the echoes of his riders had grown fainter. The Huns had become part of the landscape they once ruled, scattered, folded into other peoples, their names softened by foreign tongues. But the wind still knew them. It moved with the same rhythm as their hooves had once beaten, and in its passing you could still feel the heartbeat of the steppe, slow, endless, alive. Along the river's edge, where the water ran deep and clear, stood a small camp of herdsmen. The tents were simple, the fires few. It was the kind of camp that would have looked the same 1,000 years earlier. Children laughing at dusk, dogs circling near the cooking pots, the smell of milk and wood smoke rising into the blue dusk. The people there didn't call themselves Huns anymore. They had other names now, other loyalties. But in the songs the elders taught their grandchildren, the old rhythm remained. That night, as the stars began to appear, an old man sat by the fire and sang. His voice was cracked and low, but it carried easily in the still air. The children gathered close, their faces lit by the flames. "Listen," he told them, "to how the wind speaks. That's how our ancestors rode, soft as breath, strong as thunder. The earth remembers their passing, even when men forget their names." The youngest, a girl with hair like dark river water, tilted her head. "Did they really ride across the world?" she asked. The old man nodded. They did. They followed the sky until there was no more east or west, only the curve of the earth itself. Some say they sought land, some say destiny. But I think they were listening, just as you should, to what the wind told them. The wind never lies. He reached into the fire and pulled out a stick that glowed red at the end. With its tip, he traced a small circle in the dirt. "This," he said, "was our world. All the tribes within, turning like stars. And here," he drew a line through it, "came the river of change. It carried us apart, but it also carried our story onward. Every river does." The children watched the glowing lines fade. Somewhere beyond the camp, an owl called, soft and distant. The old man leaned back and closed his eyes. "One day," he murmured, "someone will find the old road again. Not to conquer, but to remember. When they do, the wind will guide them." The fire crackled. The stars brightened. The night deepened. Far away, in lands where the steppe met forest and mountain, other memories stirred. Traders crossing the old routes sometimes found strange cairns built of stone, standing alone on the plains. They would stop and wonder who had placed them there, Who had carried such stones so far from the hills? When they asked the locals, they received only shrugs. Old, the herdsman would say, older than stories. At certain times of year, when the wind blew from the east, the grass around those cairns would bend all in one direction, as though bowing to something unseen. Birds would fall silent, horses would prick their ears, and for a moment, just a moment, the plain would feel as though it were listening. No one knew whose bones lay beneath those stones, or whether any bones remained at all. But the people who passed by them left offerings nonetheless. A lock of horsehair, a carved bone, a cup of water poured onto the earth. Such gestures cost little, and they felt right. Respect for the unseen has always been the simplest form of wisdom. Seasons turned, empires rose and fell, their languages changing like the tides of a sea. The old Roman roads crumbled, then disappeared beneath fields of wheat. Cities were built where forests had stood, then burned, then rebuilt again. Yet through it all, the rivers kept flowing, carrying with them the memory of those who had once followed their course like veins across the body of the world. In monasteries, monks copied stories about Attila in neat Latin script, their candles flickering. Some called him a tyrant, others a punishment from God. A few, braver or more curious, wrote of him as a man who had simply lived by the measure of his time, fierce, flawed, magnificent. His name passed from scripture to legend, from legend to song. Each telling changed him, polishing his edges, dressing him in myth, until he no longer resembled the man who had once eaten from a wooden plate beneath the wide and honest sky. But among the people of the plains, the memory stayed closer to truth. They did not paint him in holiness or horror. They remembered him as a rider who belonged to the wind, no more, no less. A man who had lived without walls and dreamed without fear. A man who had listened to the voices of his horses, his people, and the earth itself. Even now, when the storms roll across the steppe, the herdsmen say his spirit rides within them. You can hear him in the first peal of thunder. See him in the way the grass bows as if under invisible hooves. The storm never lingers long. It passes as he once did. But while it lasts, the whole world seems to hold its breath. In spring, the river floods. The waters rise, breaking their banks, sweeping over the low meadows. When the flood recedes, the land glistens like a mirror. Fish lie stranded in shallow pools. Reeds sparkle with droplets. Children run barefoot through the wet fields, laughing. Their mothers call them back, warning them not to stray too far. But the children do not listen. They chase the shimmer of the light, pretending the pools are the hooves of invisible riders splashing across the plains. One boy stops and crouches beside a small mound of earth newly revealed by the retreating water. Something gleams within it, a piece of metal, smooth and curved. He digs it free and holds it up to the sun. It is the broken tip of an arrow, ancient and dark with age. The others gather around him, marveling. "What is it?" they ask. He shrugs. "Something from before." They pass it between them, feeling its weight. When at last it returns to his hand, he hesitates, then tosses it back into the water. "Let it keep moving," he says. "It belongs to the river now." The others nod, and for a moment, none of them speak. They stand watching the current carry it away, a tiny glint of history swallowed by the same flow that has always carried the world from one age to the next. Night falls again, as it always does. The fires of the camp flare and sink, the smoke rising straight into the quiet air. Somewhere, a horse nickers softly. A mother hums to her child, and the tune is old, older than she knows. It tells of riders and rivers, of courage and patience, of how the sky bends low to listen when men live close to the ground. Beyond the camp, the steppe lies vast and dark. The stars scatter themselves across it like seeds, bright and innumerable. If you stand there long enough, the distance between them and the earth begins to blur, until it feels as though the sky is simply another plane turned upside down. An eternal pasture for those who have gone before. Somewhere up there, the old riders still move. Their horses are made of wind and light now, their saddles the clouds. They ride not for conquest, but for continuity, circling forever, keeping the rhythm alive. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear their laughter, faint as rain on grass, patient as time. The earth remembers their weight, the rivers remember their thirst, the sky remembers their direction, and the wind, that faithful historian, carries them onward, telling their story without end. The old man who had sung by the fire sleeps now, wrapped in his cloak. The children who listen to him dream of endless horizons. The camp is still. Only the wind moves, stirring the ashes of the fire until one last ember glows. A single point of light in the dark, steady and alive. Somewhere far beyond the edge of sight, a storm gathers. It rolls softly over the plain, its thunder too distant to frighten, its rain too fine to drench. It touches the river, the grass, the stones of forgotten cairns. It passes over graves hidden by centuries and kisses the dust where once kings stood. And when it is gone, the world smells clean again, as though history itself has been washed, leaving only its outlines behind. The plains stretch on, wide and unbroken. The stars wheel slowly above them. The horses breathe. The wind moves. And still it remembers. Always it remembers. The story of the Huns, not as conquest, but as motion. Not as ruin, but as rhythm. Not as ending, but as wind eternal. The wind that carries everything away and carries everything home.